The woman lying broken on that rain-soaked highway had once destroyed Evan Cole's entire life with a single signature. 10 years ago, Victoria Lane, the ice-cold CEO of Lane Industries, had fired him without explanation, blacklisted him from the industry, and left his family to drown in debt. Now, through the cruelest twist of fate, she lay unconscious in his arms, completely at his mercy. He could drive past, leave her there, let karma finish what it started. But Evan Cole wasn't built that way, and that choice would change everything. Before we begin, please follow this story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The storm hit Idaho like God's own fist. Evan Cole gripped the steering wheel of his ancient Ford pickup, squinting through windshield wipers that had seen better decades. Rain hammered the glass in sheets so thick the road disappeared every few seconds, leaving only the ghostly glow of his headlights cutting through the darkness. It was past 11 on a Thursday night, and every muscle in his body ached from 12 hours under cars at Morrison's auto shop, 12 hours of oil changes, brake replacements, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing you're worth more than this but having nowhere else to go. The radio crackled with static as the emergency broadcast system droned warnings about flash flooding and advised residents to stay off the roads. Evan would have laughed if he had the energy. Stay off the roads. Easy advice when you weren't a single father working double shifts to keep the lights on and your daughter's college fund from completely evaporating. Lightning split the sky, turning everything white for a heartbeat. Thunder followed immediately, close enough that Evan felt it in his chest, a percussion that matched his tired heart. The two-lane highway stretched empty before him, winding through the kind of rural darkness that city people never quite understood. No streetlights, no houses, just wilderness and weather and the occasional reflective mile marker reminding you how far you were from anywhere that mattered. He was 3 miles from home when his headlights caught something that didn't belong. At first, Evan thought it was debris, a fallen branch or maybe a deer that hadn't made it across the road. But as he drew closer, his foot instinctively moved from gas to brake, and his stomach twisted with a recognition that came before conscious thought. A person. Someone lying motionless on the shoulder of the highway. Jesus Christ, Evan breathed, already pulling onto the gravel shoulder. His hazard lights started their rhythmic blinking, casting orange pulses across the scene. He grabbed the flashlight from his glove compartment, the good one he kept for emergencies, and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like a physical assault, instantly soaking through his work shirt and plastering his dark hair to his forehead. Wind whipped at his jacket as he jogged toward the figure, his boots splashing through puddles that had already formed in the road's uneven surface. The flashlight beam danced across wet pavement until it found her. A woman. Lying on her side in the mud and gravel, one arm bent beneath her at an angle that made Evan wince. Her clothes, expensive clothes, he noted even through the rain and darkness, were torn and filthy. Blood matted her blonde hair on one side, dark against the pale strands. She wasn't moving. "Ma'am?" Evan knelt beside her, his jeans immediately soaking through at the knees. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse, and released a breath he hadn't known he was holding when he felt it. Weak and thready, but there. She was alive. Evan's mind raced through the options. Call 911, but he'd passed the last cell tower 10 miles back, and his phone showed no service. Drive to town for help. But that was 15 minutes there and 15 back, minimum, and she could die before he returned. The rain was getting worse, the temperature dropping, and hypothermia was a real threat. He made the only choice he could. Working carefully, Evan slipped his arms beneath the woman's shoulders and knees. She was lighter than he expected. Too light, really, for someone who had to be in her late 30s or early 40s. Malnutrition, maybe, or illness. He lifted her as gently as he could and carried her toward the truck, shielding her face from the rain with his shoulder. Getting her into the passenger seat was an awkward dance of angles and care. Evan secured the seatbelt across her chest, tilted the seat back, and grabbed an old blanket from behind the seat to cover her. She still hadn't stirred. The blood on her head looked worse in the truck's interior light, a gash above her left temple, crusted with dirt and gravel. "Just hang on," Evan murmured, though he didn't know if she could hear him. "Just hang on." He drove faster than he should have on the wet roads, his eyes constantly flicking between the highway and the unconscious woman beside him. She was someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother, someone who'd made the mistake of being out in this storm, who'd somehow ended up broken on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The lights of his small house appeared through the rain like a beacon. Evan had never been so grateful to see home. A modest two-bedroom ranch that had seen better days but was theirs, paid for with 15 years of mortgage payments he'd never missed, not even in the worst times. Maya had left the porch light on for him like she always did, a small gesture that never failed to warm something in his chest. Evan pulled into the gravel driveway and laid on the horn twice, their signal. By the time he'd gotten out and opened the passenger door, the front door of the house swung open and Maya appeared, backlit by the living room lamp. "Dad?" His daughter's voice carried worry even through the rain. At 17, Maya Cole had inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's practical nature. She stood on the porch in sweatpants and one of Evan's old flannel shirts, her dark curly hair pulled back in a messy bun. "What's wrong?" "Found someone on the highway," Evan called back. "Need your help." Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed the emergency poncho from the hook by the door and ran out into the storm, her bare feet splashing through puddles. Together, they maneuvered the unconscious woman out of the truck. Maya took the legs while Evan supported the torso, and they half-carried, half-dragged her up the porch steps and through the front door. "Lay her on the couch," Evan instructed, already moving into crisis mode. "Get the first aid kit from the bathroom, the big one, and grab all the clean towels you can find." Maya disappeared down the hallway while Evan carefully positioned the woman on their worn brown couch. He elevated her head slightly with a throw pillow and began a quick assessment. The head wound was the most obvious injury, but he checked her arms and legs for breaks, looked for signs of internal bleeding. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Not medical training exactly, but the kind of emergency know-how you picked up raising a kid alone and living paycheck to paycheck where a hospital visit could mean financial disaster. "Here." Maya returned with an armful of supplies, her eyes wide as she took in the stranger on their couch. "Dad? Who is she?" "Don't know. No ID that I could find." Evan opened the first aid kit and pulled on a pair of latex gloves. "She's in rough shape, though. Help me get these wet clothes off her. She needs to warm up, or hypothermia is going to be a problem." They worked in tandem, the easy coordination of two people who'd been a team for a long time. Maya retrieved dry clothes, sweatpants, and a soft t-shirt from her own drawer, while Evan carefully cleaned the head wound. It was deep, but not as bad as the blood had suggested. Head wounds always bled dramatically. He applied antiseptic, watching for any reaction that might indicate consciousness, but the woman remained still. "Is she going to be okay?" Maya asked softly, helping ease the stranger into dry clothes while maintaining what modesty they could. "I think so. Pulse is getting stronger, breathing's regular, probably a concussion at minimum. We'll keep an eye on her tonight, and if she doesn't wake up by morning, we'll get her to a hospital no matter what." They covered her with 2 heavy blankets and positioned a space heater nearby. Evan checked her pupils with a pen light, both responding, which was good, and made sure her airway was clear. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Maya made coffee while Evan changed out of his wet clothes and into dry jeans and a thermal shirt. The storm continued to rage outside, rain battering the windows and wind howling around the eaves. It was the kind of night that made you grateful for walls and a roof, for warmth and electric lights, and the simple comfort of safety. "This is insane," Maya said, curling up in the armchair across from the couch, cradling her coffee mug in both hands. "What do you think happened to her?" "Car accident, maybe. Could have wandered away from a crash scene. The head injury might have caused confusion." Evan settled into his own chair, keeping his eyes on their unexpected guest. "We'll find out when she wakes up." "If she wakes up," his mind whispered, but he didn't voice that particular fear. They took turns keeping watch through the night. Evan sent Maya to bed around 1 a.m., but she only lasted an hour before she was back, unable to sleep with a stranger in their house. He couldn't blame her. The whole situation felt surreal, like something that happened in movies or to other people, not to an exhausted mechanic and his daughter in their small Idaho town where the biggest excitement was usually the Friday night football game. Around 3 in the morning, the woman stirred for the first time. It was subtle, just a flutter of her eyelids and a soft moan, but Evan was on his feet immediately, moving to kneel beside the couch. Maya appeared at his shoulder, both of them leaning in as the stranger's face contorted in what looked like pain. "Ma'am?" Evan kept his voice gentle. "Can you hear me? You're safe. You're in my home. We found you on the highway." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. They were blue, Evan noticed. A striking pale blue that seemed almost gray in the lamplight. She blinked several times, her gaze wandering across the unfamiliar ceiling, the strange faces hovering above her before finally settling on Evan with something approaching awareness. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and dry. "Where am I?" "You're in my house, in Meridian, Idaho." Evan reached for the glass of water they'd kept ready. "I'm Evan Cole. This is my daughter Maya. We found you unconscious on Highway 20 during the storm. Do you remember what happened?" The woman's eyes drifted closed again, but this time it seemed like she was thinking rather than losing consciousness. When they opened, there was something sharper there, intelligence reasserting itself through the fog of injury and confusion. There was a car, headlights. I tried to..." She trailed off, frustration crossing her features. "I can't remember." "That's okay. Head injuries can do that. Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, and for a moment Evan wondered if the injury had stolen even that basic piece of identity. Then she spoke, and the name hit him like a physical blow. "Victoria. Victoria Lane." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Evan Cole knew that name. Knew it the way you knew the name of a disease that had nearly killed you, or a natural disaster that had destroyed everything you'd built. Victoria Lane, CEO of Lane Industries, the woman who had single-handedly demolished his career and nearly destroyed his life 10 years ago. "Dad?" Maya's voice came from somewhere far away. "Dad, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He must have made some sound, some sharp intake of breath or involuntary noise, because Victoria's eyes locked onto his face with sudden intensity. She studied him, and he watched as recognition dawned in those pale blue eyes. Recognition and something that might have been horror. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Evan Cole, you're... oh my God." Maya looked between them, confusion written across her face. "You two know each other?" "We did," Evan managed, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "A long time ago." Victoria tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillow. "I worked for you. No, you worked for me. Lane Industries, you were..." She pressed a hand to her forehead, whether from pain or distress he couldn't tell. "You were the lead engineer on the Morrison project 10 years ago. Until you fired me." The words came out harder than Evan intended, carrying the weight of a decade's worth of bitterness and barely healed wounds. "Until you fired me without cause, blacklisted me in the industry, and made sure I could never work as an engineer again." Maya's coffee mug hit the side table with a sharp click. "Wait, this is her? The one who..." "Yeah." Evan stood up, needing distance, needing air. His mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible coincidence of finding this specific woman on that specific stretch of highway, of carrying his own destroyer into his home and saving her life. "This is her." Victoria's face had gone pale, paler than it already was, and her eyes glistened with what might have been tears. "Evan, don't." He held up a hand, surprised by how steady it was when everything inside him was shaking. "Just don't. Not right now." The silence that followed was broken only by the storm outside and the ticking of the ancient clock on the mantel, the one that had belonged to Evan's grandfather, one of the few things he'd managed to keep when everything else had been sold or repossessed. 10 years ago, Evan Cole had been going places. At 32, he'd been the youngest lead engineer at Lane Industries, a mid-sized tech manufacturing company with big ambitions. The Morrison Project, a revolutionary new manufacturing process that could have changed the industry, had been his baby, his masterpiece. He'd poured everything into it, working 80-hour weeks, building a team, creating something genuinely innovative. And then Victoria Lane, who'd inherited the company from her father and was determined to make her mark, had called him into her office on a Tuesday morning and fired him. Effective immediately. No explanation beyond performance issues that didn't exist, No severance package, no reference letter, nothing. Within a week, he'd been blacklisted. Phone calls went unreturned. Interviews were mysteriously canceled. The industry he'd dedicated his adult life to had closed its doors in his face, and he'd never understood why. The months that followed had been the darkest of Evan's life. His wife Sarah, Maya's mother, had left him within 6 months, unable or unwilling to weather the storm. The house had nearly been foreclosed on. He'd drained his retirement accounts, his savings, everything, trying to keep them afloat while searching desperately for work that never came. He'd ended up at Morrison's auto shop because Danny Morrison had been his college roommate and took pity on him. Mechanic work when you'd been a senior engineer felt like a special kind of defeat, but it paid the bills. Barely. And it let him be there for Maya, who'd been 7 years old and didn't understand why Daddy was sad all the time, why Mommy left, why they had to move to a smaller house and couldn't afford dance classes anymore. 10 years. 10 years of rebuilding from nothing, of swallowing pride and bitterness, of learning to find meaning in the smaller life he'd been forced into. 10 years of being a good father to Maya even when everything else had been stripped away. 10 years of wondering what he'd done to deserve what Victoria Lane had done to him. And now she was here, in his house, under his roof, helpless and injured and completely at his mercy. The irony was so sharp it could cut. "I should call someone for you," Evan said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Someone who can come get you. Family? Friends?" Victoria's laugh was bitter and broken. "There's no one. My family—" She closed her eyes. "There's no one to call." "A hotel, then. I can drive you to—" "The company's gone," Victoria interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lane Industries collapsed 18 months ago. Scandal. Fraud. It was all over the news. I lost everything. The business, my reputation, my marriage. Everything." Evan stared at her, trying to process this information. "What?" "I'm broke, Evan. Completely broke. I came out here because—" She gestured vaguely. "I don't even know why. Running, I guess. From debt collectors, from reporters, from the wreckage of my life. I was driving and the storm hit and I don't remember what happened next. Waking up here is the first clear memory I have." Maya had been quiet through this exchange, watching with the kind of intense focus she got when she was trying to understand something complicated. Now she spoke up, her voice carefully measured. "So you can't go anywhere. You have no money, no family to call, and you're injured. That about sums it up." Victoria's smile was ghastly. "I'm sure you're both thrilled about that." Evan ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion and confusion and too many complicated emotions warring inside him. The right thing, the moral thing, was obvious. You didn't throw an injured woman out into a storm, no matter who she was or what she'd done. You didn't abandon someone who needed help just because they'd once hurt you. But God, it was hard. "You'll stay here tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But right now you need to rest, and we all need to think." "Evan, I'm not doing this for you," he cut her off, needing her to understand. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, because I'm not the kind of person who leaves people to die on the side of the road, even if maybe I should be." The look Victoria gave him was complicated, shame and gratitude and something that might have been grief all tangled together. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." Evan didn't respond to that. He stood up, suddenly desperate for space, for air, for a moment alone to process the impossibility of this night. "Maya, can you sit with her? I need to—" He didn't finish the sentence, just walked out onto the porch, letting the screen door bang shut behind him. The storm had lessened to a steady rain, the violence having moved east. Evan stood under the porch roof, watching water drip from the eaves, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the railing. The wood was rough under his palms, solid and real, an anchor point in a night that had gone completely sideways. Victoria Lane, here, in his house. The universe had to be laughing. Behind him, through the window, he could hear Maya's voice, gentle and questioning, and Victoria's softer responses. His daughter was too kind for her own good sometimes, too willing to see the best in people. She'd grown up knowing what her father had lost, knowing the before and after of their lives, but she'd been too young to truly understand the weight of it, the profound injustice. Evan had worked hard not to poison her with his bitterness. He'd never wanted Maya to grow up angry or cynical, to see the world as a place that would betray you without warning. So he'd swallowed the rage, processed the hurt in private, and built a life that was smaller but good enough for both of them. And now the architect of his downfall was sleeping on his couch, broken and alone, with nowhere else to go. The screen door creaked open behind him. Maya stepped out, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. For a long moment they stood together in silence, father and daughter, listening to the rain. "Are you okay?" Maya asked finally. "I don't know," Evan admitted. I never thought I'd see her again. Never wanted to. She looks terrible, like really terrible. Did you see how thin she is? And her hands, they're all scarred up." I noticed. "She's been through something bad, Dad. Maybe multiple bad somethings. That doesn't erase what she did to us." "No," Maya agreed. "It doesn't, but maybe—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe it means something that you still helped her. That when it mattered, you did the right thing." Evan looked at his daughter, 17 years old and already wiser than he'd been at 30. "When did you get so grown up?" Maya smiled slightly. Someone had to be the adult in this family. "Hey now." But he was smiling too, just a little, despite everything. They went back inside together. Victoria had fallen asleep again, or lost consciousness, it was hard to tell which, but her breathing was even and her color was better. The immediate danger had passed. Whatever else this night had brought, she would live. Evan settled into his chair and pulled an old quilt over his lap. Maya curled up in the other chair with a blanket of her own. They'd keep vigil through what remained of the night, taking turns dozing, making sure their unexpected and deeply unwelcome guest stayed stable. Outside, the storm finally broke. The rain tapered to drizzle, then mist, then nothing at all. By the time dawn began to gray the eastern sky, the clouds had parted enough to show stars, cold and distant and indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. Evan watched Victoria sleep and tried not to think about all the ways his life had been shattered 10 years ago. Tried not to remember the feeling of being erased from his own profession, of watching everything he'd worked for disappear like it had never existed. Tried not to feel the bitter satisfaction that came from seeing his destroyer brought so low. But he also couldn't help remembering something his grandfather had told him once, back when Evan was young and the world seemed simple. The measure of a man isn't what he does when it's easy. It's what he does when it's hard, when nobody's watching, when doing the right thing costs him something. This cost him something, having Victoria Lane in his home. Cost him peace of mind, cost him the comfort of old grievances, cost him the clean simplicity of righteous anger. But Evan Cole had been measured by hardship before and refused to be found wanting. He'd survived the destruction of his career, a divorce, near poverty, and the complete rebuilding of his life from scratch. He'd survived all of it with his integrity intact, with his ability to be a good father preserved, with his fundamental decency still operational. He could survive this too. And maybe, though he barely dared think it, maybe this impossible situation held some kind of answer, some explanation for why his life had been derailed a decade ago, some closure to a wound that had never quite healed. As the sun rose over the Idaho mountains, painting the wet world in shades of gold and amber, Evan made a decision. He would help Victoria Lane, not for her sake, but for his own. He would do the right thing because that was who he was, who he'd always been, even when the universe had given him every reason to be someone else. But he would also get his answers. He would understand, finally, why everything had been taken from him. And then, only then, could he truly move forward. Victoria stirred as full daylight crept through the windows, her eyes fluttering open with more clarity than before. Her gaze found Evan immediately, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of history and hurt, and the strange twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. "Why?" she asked hoarsely. "Why did you help me? After everything I did to you, why didn't you just drive past?" Evan was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Because leaving you there would have made me like you. And I spent 10 years refusing to let what you did change who I am. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with unflinching honesty. But make no mistake, Victoria. You owe me answers. You owe me the truth about what happened 10 years ago. And before you leave this house, however long that takes, I'm going to get them. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Okay. You deserve that much. You deserve so much more than that. Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, everything bright and new and sparkling with possibility. Inside the small house on the edge of Meridian, Idaho, 3 people sat in the aftermath of an impossible coincidence, standing at the edge of a reckoning 10 years in the making. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen. The old clock ticked steadily on the mantel. And somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing, tentative at first, then growing bolder, welcoming the day. Whatever came next would be complicated and painful and messy. But it would also be honest. And after a decade of unanswered questions and unresolved hurt, honesty felt like the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. Evan Cole had saved Victoria Lane's life. Now, in a way neither of them yet understood, she might have the chance to give something back. Not redemption exactly, but perhaps understanding. Perhaps truth. Perhaps the closure that would finally allow both of them to heal. The story was far from over. In many ways, it was only beginning. The morning light that filled the small living room felt too bright, too ordinary for the weight of what hung between them. Maya had retreated to the kitchen under the pretense of making breakfast, but Evan could hear the careful quietness of her movements. She was listening, giving them space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Victoria struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at injuries Evan suspected went beyond the visible head wound. He almost moved to help her, then stopped himself. There was a line between basic human decency and the kind of care you gave to people you actually wanted in your life, and he needed to keep that boundary clear. "Take it slow," he said instead, staying in his chair. "You probably have a concussion, maybe cracked ribs. You should see a doctor." "I can't afford a doctor." Victoria's voice was flat, matter of fact. "I can't afford anything right now. My credit cards are maxed out. I have maybe $40 in cash. Everything else is gone." The word hung in the air like smoke. Gone. Evan knew that word intimately, knew the special kind of devastation it carried. He'd said it himself 10 years ago. His career was gone, his marriage was gone, his future was gone. Everything he'd built had been reduced to that single syllable. How? The question came out rougher than he intended. How does someone go from CEO of a multi-million-dollar company to broken alone in the span of 18 months? Victoria's laugh was hollow. "You really want to know? You want the whole sordid story of how karma came for me?" "Yeah," Evan said. "I do. But first, I want to know why you fired me. I want to know what I did to deserve having my entire life destroyed." Maya appeared in the doorway with 3 mugs of coffee, her timing impeccable. She handed them out in silence, then settled onto the floor between the 2 chairs, cross-legged like she used to sit as a child during story time. The message was clear. She wasn't going anywhere. Victoria wrapped both hands around her mug, staring into the dark liquid like it might hold answers. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet they had to lean in to hear. "You didn't do anything wrong, Evan. That's the hell of it. You were brilliant, the best engineer I've ever worked with. The Morrison project was going to put Lane Industries on the map, and you were the reason why." Then why? Thomas Jensen. The name came out like poison. My father's oldest friend. He'd been CFO since before I was born. When Dad died and I took over the company, Thomas was supposed to guide me, help me navigate the business side while I learned. Instead, he was embezzling millions of dollars over the course of years, hidden in shell companies and creative accounting that I was too inexperienced to catch. Evan felt something cold settle in his stomach. What does that have to do with me? The Morrison project had a budget of $8 million, do you remember? Of course I remember. I built that budget line by line. Thomas had been siphoning money from it almost from day one. By the time I started asking questions, by the time I realized the numbers didn't add up, he'd taken nearly $3 million. The project was going to fail, and when it did, there would be an audit. The embezzlement would come to light. He'd go to prison. Victoria's hands trembled around the mug. Maya reached up and steadied it before the hot liquid could spill. So he came to me with evidence, Victoria continued, her voice bitter. Documents that appeared to show you were the one stealing. Falsified purchase orders, fake contractor invoices, all with your digital signature. He said you'd been taking kickbacks, inflating costs, running a scheme to defraud the company, and God help me, I believed him. The room seemed to tilt. Evan's coffee mug hit the side table with a sharp crack. You believed him? Without even talking to me? Without investigating? I was 28 years old and terrified of failing at the company my father built. Victoria's voice rose, then broke. Thomas had been like an uncle to me my whole life. You'd only been with the company 3 years. He showed me documents, Evan. They looked real. They looked damning. And he said if I didn't act immediately, if word got out that Lane Industries employed a thief, we'd lose everything. Investors would pull out, contracts would be canceled, the whole company would collapse. So you fired me. You blacklisted me. You destroyed my career to cover up his crimes. Evan's voice was shaking now, 10 years of suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. He said it was the only way to contain it. Fire you quietly, make sure you couldn't work in the industry, and potentially expose what happened. He said he'd handle everything else, make the financial problems go away. And like a fool, like a stupid, naive fool, I let him. Maya's voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. But you found out the truth eventually. Otherwise, why would the company have collapsed? Victoria's smile was ghastly. I found out 5 years later, 5 years of Thomas continuing to steal, continuing to cover his tracks. By then, he'd taken almost $20 million. When I finally saw the real financial statements, when one of our junior accountants got suspicious and came to me, it was too late. The company was hemorrhaging money, debts we couldn't pay, obligations we couldn't meet. She set down her coffee mug and wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold something together that was already broken. I went to the authorities immediately, handed over everything, every document, every piece of evidence. Thomas was arrested. But by then, Lane Industries was a sinking ship. The scandal hit the news. Investors fled. Partners backed out of contracts. Within 6 months, we had to file for bankruptcy. And Thomas? Evan's voice was ice. Plea deal. He gave back some of the money, cooperated with the investigation into his shell companies, got 7 years, will probably serve 4. Victoria's face twisted with contempt. Meanwhile, I lost everything. The company my grandfather founded, that my father built into something real. Gone. My reputation? Destroyed. I was the CEO who let it happen, who was too stupid to see what was right in front of her face. You were the scapegoat, Maya said softly. I was the failure. Victoria's eyes were distant, looking at something none of them could see. My husband left within weeks of the bankruptcy filing, said he didn't sign up for this kind of embarrassment. My mother, she blamed me for destroying Dad's legacy. Stopped taking my calls. My friends, or the people I thought were friends, disappeared the moment I couldn't afford to keep up with their lifestyle. She fell silent, and in that silence, Evan heard the echo of his own darkest days. The isolation, the shame, the feeling of being erased from your own life while the world moved on without you. Where have you been living? Maya asked. For the past 18 months? Shelters, mostly. Sometimes my car until it got repossessed. I've been trying to find work, but my name is poison. Google Victoria Lane and you get pages of articles about the scandal. No one will hire me, not even for entry-level positions. They see my resume and think I'm a risk, or overqualified, or secretly planning to steal from them too. The parallel was so obvious it hurt. Evan had lived that same nightmare, been that same pariah, carried that same invisible mark that told the world he was untouchable. Why Idaho? He asked. Why here? Victoria's laugh was broken. I had an aunt in Boise, my mother's sister. I thought maybe she'd help, let me stay with her until I got back on my feet. But when I showed up at her door 3 days ago, she wouldn't let me in. Said she couldn't have that kind of trouble in her life. Told me my mother had asked her not to help me, to let me, what were the words? Face the consequences of my choices. Maya made a small sound of distress. Evan felt his jaw tighten. Whatever Victoria had done, whatever mistakes she'd made, the cruelty of being abandoned by your own family struck a chord he couldn't ignore. He'd been there too, watching his wife walk out, listening to former friends make excuses why they couldn't help. I was driving because I didn't know what else to do, Victoria continued. No destination, just moving because stopping meant dealing with everything. The storm hit, and I pulled over because I couldn't see. I must have gotten out of the car. I don't remember why. Maybe I heard something or thought I saw something. The next thing I remember is headlights, bright and close, and then nothing until I woke up here. Your car, Evan said. Where is it? I don't know. Somewhere on Highway 20, I guess, if it hasn't been towed. Evan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to maintain distance, to get Victoria well enough to leave and then wash his hands of the whole situation. She'd explained what happened, given him the closure he'd demanded. That should be enough. But there was something in her story that kept pulling at him. The way Thomas Jensen had manipulated her, used her inexperience against her, made her complicit in Evan's destruction while covering his own crimes. Victoria had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, to fire him without investigation, to blacklist him based on falsified evidence. But she'd also been victimized by the same man, in a different way. And now they were both here, on opposite ends of the same 10-year disaster, carrying scars from the same source. I need to think, Evan said finally, standing up. The walls of the small living room felt too close suddenly. Maya, can you make sure she eats something? Toast, soup, whatever we have that's easy on the stomach. Sure, Dad. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and stepped outside. The morning was cold and bright, the storm-washed air sharp in his lungs. His truck sat in the driveway, mud-splattered and faithful. Evan walked to it, rested his hands on the hood, and tried to organize his thoughts. 10 years ago, Thomas Jensen had destroyed his life to cover embezzlement. Victoria had been the weapon, naive, inexperienced, and manipulated, but the real villain had been someone else entirely. Knowing that should have brought relief, should have transferred his anger to the right target. Instead, it just made everything more complicated. Victoria had still made the choice to fire him. She'd still chosen to believe lies without investigation, to protect the company's reputation at the cost of Evan's entire career. Youth and inexperience didn't excuse that. Good intentions didn't erase the harm done. But she'd paid for those mistakes, paid dearly, in ways that mirrored his own suffering. The universe had balanced the scales without any input from him. The screen door creaked. Evan turned to find Maya joining him, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. That was a lot, she said quietly. Yeah. Do you believe her? It was the right question. Evan considered it carefully. I think so. It explains things that never made sense. Why I was fired so abruptly. Why the blacklisting was so thorough. Thomas would have needed Victoria's cooperation to make that happen. And her story about the company collapse, that was all over the news. I remember reading about it, actually, feeling satisfied that karma had caught up with her. And now? Now I don't know what I feel. Evan turned to his daughter. She destroyed my life, Maya. Our lives. We lost the house, your mom left. We had to start over from nothing. I drove past our old neighborhood last year, saw the house we used to live in. Remember it? Barely. I was so young. It had a real yard, a good school district. I was going to teach you to ride a bike in that driveway. His voice caught. Instead, I taught you in the parking lot of our apartment complex the year after we lost everything. I wanted to give you so much more than what we ended up with. Maya stepped closer and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. Dad, you gave me everything that mattered. I don't remember the old house, but I remember you being there every day, showing up, making sure I had what I needed. We didn't have money, but we had each other, and that was enough. You deserved better. Maybe, but I got pretty lucky in the dad department. She squeezed his hand. And yeah, what Victoria did was terrible, but she was lied to, manipulated by someone she trusted. If you'd been in her position, 28 years old, terrified, presented with what looked like proof of theft, what would you have done? Evan wanted to say he would have been smarter, more careful, more just, but honesty compelled a different answer. I don't know. Maybe the same thing. Probably not. I'd like to think I'd investigate, but I can't say for certain. They stood in silence, watching a neighbor's cat pick its way across the wet grass. What are you thinking? Maya asked finally. I'm thinking that revenge isn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. I'm thinking that seeing someone who hurt you suffer doesn't actually heal your wounds. It just opens theirs. And I'm thinking that I spent 10 years being angry at the wrong person, while the man who actually destroyed both our lives got away with a slap on the wrist. So what do we do? The right thing, I guess, whatever that is. Evan looked back at the house, where Victoria Lane sat on their couch, broken and alone. She stays until she's well enough to travel. I'll help her find her car, see if it's salvageable. Beyond that, I don't know yet. They went back inside to find Victoria had fallen asleep again, her head tilted awkwardly against the couch arm. In sleep, the lines of stress and suffering on her face softened slightly. She looked younger, more vulnerable, less like the powerful CEO from Evan's memories, and more like someone who'd been ground down by circumstances beyond her control. Maya covered her gently with an extra blanket, then disappeared into the kitchen to make the promised food. Evan settled back into his chair, watching his destroyer sleep in his living room, and tried to figure out how to move forward when the past kept pulling him back. The hours passed quietly. Victoria woke occasionally, ate a little soup, answered questions about her symptoms to determine if she needed emergency medical care. The concussion seemed mild, the other injuries painful but not life-threatening. Rest was the best medicine, and Evan's couch was as good a place as any for that. Around noon, Evan called Morrison's auto shop to let them know he wouldn't be in. Danny Morrison, still his college roommate, still his friend even after everything, took one look at the situation when Evan briefly explained it and told him to take whatever time he needed. "You found who on the highway?" Danny's voice was incredulous through the phone. "Victoria Lane. The Victoria Lane." A long whistle. "Man, when you pick up strays, you don't mess around. You okay?" "I'm processing. Listen, I might need to borrow the tow truck later. She's got a car stranded somewhere on Highway 20. It's yours whenever you need it. And Evan, call me if this gets weird, okay? If you need backup or just someone to vent to." "Thanks, Danny." The afternoon brought unexpected complications. Maya, never one to let suffering go unaddressed, had apparently decided that Victoria needed more than just physical care. Evan found them in the living room, Maya sitting on the floor beside the couch, while Victoria sat up with a notebook in her lap. "What's this?" Evan asked. "We're making a list," Maya announced. "Things Victoria needs to do to get back on her feet." Evan raised an eyebrow. "We are?" "Someone has to. She can't just wander around homeless and injured. That's how people fall through the cracks and never recover." Victoria looked embarrassed, but also touched. "Your daughter has strong opinions about social safety nets." "She gets that from her mother," Evan said, then immediately regretted mentioning Sarah. But Maya just rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "So far we have. Get medical care, find her car, get legal copies of her documents since everything was in her car, and figure out next steps for employment." Maya looked up at her father. "What would you add?" Evan couldn't help but smile slightly at his daughter's determination. Probably should add, rest and recover before doing anything else. Hard to job hunt when you can barely stay conscious for more than an hour. "That's what I said," Victoria interjected. "But Maya is persistent." "You have no idea," Evan muttered, but there was affection in it. He sat down and actually looked at the list Maya had started. It was practical and thorough, exactly what someone in Victoria's position would need. Next to each item, Maya had noted potential resources: free clinics for medical care, legal aid for documents, local employment services. "You've been researching," Evan observed, "while you were on the phone. The internet is useful for more than just social media, you know." Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You don't have to do this. Either of you. You've already done more than I deserve." "Maybe," Maya said simply. "But we're doing it anyway. Right, Dad?" Evan met his daughter's eyes and saw the challenge there. The question of what kind of man he was going to be. He could hold on to his anger, his justified grievances, and send Victoria back into the world barely healed. Or he could be the person Maya believed him to be, the person he'd worked hard to remain despite everything. "Right," he said finally. "But we're doing this smart. Victoria stays here until she's recovered enough to travel safely. That gives us time to sort out the car situation, get her documents in order, figure out next steps. But this is temporary. We're clear on that?" Victoria nodded quickly. Crystal clear. I don't want to impose any more than necessary. Good. Then we understand each other. The rest of the afternoon passed in strange domesticity. Evan made sandwiches while Maya researched free legal clinics in Idaho. Victoria dozed on and off, her body demanding rest even when her mind seemed restless. At one point, Evan found himself sitting beside her, checking the head wound for signs of infection, and was struck by how bizarre the situation was. "This is surreal," Victoria murmured, as if reading his thoughts. "Being here, with you. You're telling me. I never thought I'd see you again. After everything imploded, after I lost the company and learned what Thomas had done, I tried to find you, to apologize, to explain. But you'd moved, changed your number. You didn't exist on social media. It was like you disappeared." "I did, mostly." Evan applied fresh antiseptic to the wound, his touch gentler than strictly necessary. "Didn't see the point in maintaining connections that would just remind me of what I'd lost. Started over with a clean slate." "Did it work? Starting over?" Evan sat back, considering the question honestly. "Yes and no. I built a decent life. Not the life I planned, not the career I wanted, but something good enough. Maya turned out amazing despite everything. I learned to find meaning in smaller things, fixing an engine perfectly, coaching Little League, being present for my kid. It wasn't what I expected, but it was real. Do you ever miss it, engineering?" The question hit harder than expected. "Every day," Evan admitted. "Every single day. I see problems and my brain still tries to solve them the way an engineer would. I read about advances in manufacturing and feel this ache in my chest for the work I used to do. But that door is closed, has been for 10 years. What if it wasn't?" Victoria's voice was quiet but intense. "What if there was a way back?" "There isn't. We both know that. The blacklist was based on lies that have now been exposed. Thomas Jensen was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. The case is public record. Anyone who looks into what happened would see that you were framed, that you lost your career because of someone else's crimes." Evan shook his head. 10 years is a long time to be out of the industry. Technology moves fast. I'd be starting from behind, competing with people half my age who never stopped working. But you'd be starting with experience and maturity they don't have, and with the truth on your side. Why do you care? The question came out sharper than intended. Why does it matter to you if I ever work as an engineer again? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on her hands. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of genuine regret. Because it's the one thing I might be able to fix. I can't give you back the 10 years you lost. Can't restore your marriage or undo the hardship you and Maya went through. But maybe I can help clear your name in the industry. Help you get back something of what was taken. That sounds like guilt talking. It is guilt talking, but that doesn't make it less true. I owe you more than I can ever repay, Evan. If there's any way to make even a small part of this right, I want to try. Before Evan could respond, Maya called from the kitchen. "Dad, Victoria's car keys, do you still have them?" He pulled the keys from his pocket where he'd placed them the night before. They were attached to a simple keychain with a rental company logo. "It's a rental," he called back. "That's actually good news," Maya said, appearing in the doorway with her phone. "Rental companies have GPS tracking. We can find out exactly where the car is. Might even still be there if it's off the main road." Evan looked at the keys, then at Victoria. "Assuming we find it and it's drivable, where were you planning to go?" The question seemed to deflate something in Victoria. "I don't know. I hadn't thought past getting away from my aunt's house. Maybe find a shelter in a bigger city, somewhere with more job opportunities." "What about your house?" Maya asked. "You must have had a house when you were CEO." "Lost it in the bankruptcy. Everything was liquidated to pay debts, the house, cars, jewelry, furniture. I've been carrying my entire life in 2 suitcases for the past 18 months. Victoria's smile was bitter. "Which are also in that rental car, along with my identification, what's left of my cash, and the only photos I still have of my family." The desperation in her voice was palpable. Evan made a decision. "We'll go look for the car now. Highway 20 isn't that long. We can retrace the route I took last night. If we find it, we'll assess the situation. If it's damaged, we'll call the rental company. Either way, we get your things back." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Maya, you coming? His daughter was already grabbing her jacket. They took Evan's truck, with Victoria bundled in the back seat despite her protests that she was fine. The afternoon sun was bright on the wet roads as they drove, retracing the route from the night before. In daylight, the landscape looked peaceful: rolling hills, scattered farms, the mountains visible in the distance. Victoria directed them to approximately where she'd pulled over, but the storm had changed things. Standing water still pooled in low spots. Debris was scattered across the shoulders. After 20 minutes of driving slowly and scanning both sides of the highway, Maya spotted something. There! Is that a car down that embankment? Evan pulled over carefully. About 50 yards off the road, down a slight slope and partially hidden by brush, sat a gray sedan. They picked their way down carefully, Victoria moving slowly due to her injuries but determined to come along. The car was in rough shape. The driver's side door stood open, and the interior was soaked from the storm. Mud caked the undercarriage and lower panels, but it was intact, no major damage visible. How did it end up down here? Maya wondered. Victoria stared at the car like she was trying to remember. I think I did pull off the road. But then what? Why would I have left the car? Evan walked around the vehicle, examining it with a mechanic's eye. The keys unlocked the trunk, which was thankfully undamaged. Inside were 2 battered suitcases, exactly as Victoria had described. He pulled them out and carried them back up to the truck. The car needs to be towed, he said. Engine's probably fine, but we need to dry everything out, check for water damage. I can do the work at the shop if the rental company gives permission. They loaded Victoria's suitcases into the truck bed and called the rental company to explain the situation. After some back and forth and confirmation of Victoria's identity, they agreed to let Evan tow it to Morrison's for assessment. The drive back felt different, more purposeful somehow. They'd recovered something, not just a car and suitcases, but a piece of Victoria's dignity. Small victories mattered when you were rebuilding from nothing. Evan knew that from experience. Back at the house, Maya helped Victoria carry her suitcases inside. Evan watched his daughter handle them carefully, saw the gentleness she showed toward someone who, by all rights, should have been their enemy, and felt pride swell in his chest. Whatever else had gone wrong in his life, he'd raised a good human being. That evening, they ate dinner together at Evan's small kitchen table. Spaghetti with sauce from a jar, garlic bread, bagged salad. Nothing fancy, but warm and filling. Victoria ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd grown accustomed to rationing meals. This is good, she said quietly. Thank you. Maya launched into a story about a debate competition at school, and the conversation flowed into safer territory: school, current events, anything but the complicated history that tied Victoria and Evan together. For a brief window, it felt almost normal, like dinner with an old friend rather than a reckoning with the past. But after Maya went to bed, the weight of everything returned. Evan and Victoria sat in the living room, the house quiet around them, both nursing cups of tea and the knowledge that nothing about this situation was resolved. I meant what I said earlier, Victoria finally broke the silence. About helping you get back into engineering. I still have contacts, people who knew me before the scandal, who might be willing to listen. I could write letters, make calls, explain what really happened. And why would they believe you? Your reputation is destroyed. You said so yourself. True. But Thomas Jensen's conviction is a matter of public record. The court documents detail the embezzlement, the falsified evidence he created to frame you. Anyone who investigates will see that you were set up. Evan stared into his tea. The offer was tempting in ways he didn't want to acknowledge. 10 years of suppressed dreams, of carefully not thinking about the career he'd lost, of finding meaning elsewhere because the alternative was too painful. Even if it worked, he said slowly, even if someone was willing to take a chance on me, I can't afford to quit my job at the shop and chase what might be a dead end. I have responsibilities. Maya's got 1 more year of high school, then college. I can't risk our stability on a maybe. I understand, but maybe you don't have to quit. Maybe you start small, consulting on weekends, taking contract work remotely. Build back gradually while keeping your current job as safety. It was a reasonable suggestion, too reasonable to dismiss out of hand, but accepting help from Victoria felt like opening a door Evan wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. I'll think about it, he said finally. That's all I can promise right now. Victoria nodded, seemingly content with that answer. The conversation drifted to other things: the logistics of recovering the rental car, what Victoria would need to do to get replacement identification, the practical steps of rebuilding a life from wreckage. They talked late into the night, two people who'd been on opposite sides of a disaster trying to find common ground. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A tentative bridge across 10 years of hurt, built on honesty and shared understanding of what it meant to lose everything. When Victoria finally fell asleep on the couch again, Evan sat watching her for a while, trying to reconcile the broken woman before him with the powerful CEO from his memories. They were the same person, but also not. Tragedy and hardship had transformed her into someone new, someone more human. He thought about Maya's words from that morning, about being lucky in the dad department. His daughter had never known the successful engineer version of Evan Cole, only the mechanic, the single father, the man who'd built a smaller but solid life from ruins. And she loved him for who he was, not who he'd almost been. Maybe that was enough. Maybe reclaiming his old career wasn't necessary for happiness or fulfillment. Or maybe, and this thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, maybe there was room for both. Room to be the present, stable father Maya needed while also reaching for the dreams he'd buried 10 years ago. The clock struck midnight. Outside, the world was dark and quiet, the storm just a memory. Inside, three people slept under the same roof, connected by tragedy, separated by history, and bound together by the strange mercy of fate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they'd survived the first day of this impossible situation. That was something. That was a start. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sound of Maya moving quietly through the kitchen, trying not to wake their guest. Evan had slept poorly, his dreams a tangle of past and present, images of his old office at Lane Industries bleeding into memories of foreclosure notices, and Maya's small face asking why mommy wasn't coming home. He found his daughter cracking eggs into a bowl, her hair still messy from sleep. "You're up early," he said, checking the clock. 6:30 on a Saturday. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about everything. Maya whisked the eggs with more force than necessary. "Dad, what Victoria said last night about helping you get back into engineering, are you going to let her try?" Evan poured himself coffee, buying time to formulate an answer. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's complicated." "Because you don't think it'll work? Or because accepting help from her feels wrong?" Sometimes his daughter's perceptiveness was uncomfortable. Both, maybe. Mostly the second one. Maya stopped whisking and turned to face him. "You know what I think? I think you're scared." "Scared of what?" "Of hoping. Of wanting something again that might get taken away." Her voice was gentle but unflinching. "You've spent 10 years building this safe, small life where nothing can hurt us too badly because we're not reaching for anything. But Dad, that's not living. That's just surviving." The words hit harder than any accusation could have. Evan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. "When did you get so wise?" he asked instead. "I had a good teacher." Maya smiled and returned to her eggs. "Just think about it, okay? Really think about it. Not about what could go wrong, but about what could go right." Victoria emerged from the living room looking marginally better than the day before. The swelling around her head wound had gone down, and there was color in her cheeks that had been absent. She moved gingerly, still favoring her ribs, but with more steadiness. "Good morning," she said, hovering awkwardly at the kitchen entrance like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. "Morning. Hungry?" Maya gestured to the eggs. "I'm making scrambled eggs with cheese. There's bacon, too, if you eat meat." "I eat anything. And scrambled eggs sound amazing. Thank you." They ate together at the small table, and Evan found himself studying Victoria in the morning light. She wore clothes from one of her suitcases, jeans that hung loose on her frame, and a faded blue sweater with holes at the cuffs. Her hands, wrapped around her coffee mug, bore scars he'd noticed before. Small burns on her fingers, calluses that didn't match someone who'd spent their career behind a desk. "What happened to your hands?" he asked before thinking better of it. Victoria looked down at them as if seeing them for the first time. "Kitchen work, mostly. After I lost everything, the only jobs I could get were under the table, dishwasher, prep cook, that kind of thing. Restaurants don't do background checks when they're paying cash. The burns are from a month I spent working the fryer at a truck stop diner in Nevada. You worked as a fry cook? Maya's voice held no judgment, only curiosity. And a janitor, and a warehouse loader, and a dog walker. Whatever paid. Victoria's smile was wry. Turns out an MBA from Stanford doesn't help much when you're trying to survive on the streets. Manual labor pays better than people think, and it's honest work. I learned to respect that. Evan felt something shift in his chest. The woman describing these experiences bore no resemblance to the CEO he remembered. The one who'd worn designer suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people without visible emotion. This Victoria had been humbled by circumstance in ways that felt familiar. After breakfast, Evan called Danny Morrison about using the tow truck to retrieve the rental car. 20 minutes later, Danny showed up in his personal vehicle, a restored '68 Mustang he treated like a third child, with the shop's tow truck keys and an undisguised curiosity. "So," Danny said as they walked toward Evan's truck, his voice low, "this is the famous Victoria Lane. Don't start. I'm not starting anything, just observing that life has a weird sense of humor." Danny handed over the keys. "The tow truck's at the shop. Bring it back whenever. And Evan, be careful, man. I know you've got a good heart, but this situation is complicated as hell." "You think I don't know that?" "I think you're the kind of guy who jumps into freezing water to save someone who's drowning, even if they're the one who pushed you in originally." Danny clapped him on the shoulder. "Just make sure you don't drown yourself in the process." The words stuck with Evan as he drove to the shop, with Victoria in the passenger seat and Maya following in his truck. The tow truck was a beast, 10 years old and temperamental, but reliable when treated right. Victoria watched him perform his pre-drive check with professional efficiency. "You're good at this," she observed. "The mechanical work. You move like someone who knows what they're doing." "I've had 10 years to learn. Danny taught me most of it. Turns out some engineering principles translate to auto repair." Evan secured the last safety check. "Ready?" They drove back to Highway 20 in comfortable silence. The morning was bright and clear, the storm's aftermath visible only in scattered debris and standing water. When they reached the embankment where the rental car sat, Evan maneuvered the tow truck with practiced ease. "I'll need to go down there to hook it up," he said. "You two stay up here." But Victoria was already opening her door. "I'm coming with you. It's my car, my responsibility." "You've got cracked ribs and a concussion. And I've been taking care of myself for 18 months. I'm not helpless, Evan." There was steel in her voice that reminded him suddenly of the CEO she'd been. Evan recognized the tone, someone asserting competence in the face of doubt. He'd used it himself often enough in the past decade. "Fine, but if you fall, I'm not carrying you back up." They picked their way down the slope together, Maya staying with the trucks as instructed. The rental car looked worse in full daylight, mud caked everywhere. The interior a disaster of wet upholstery and scattered papers. Evan knelt to examine the undercarriage, while Victoria opened the passenger door and began pulling out soggy documents. "Insurance papers, registration, my rental agreement," she muttered, laying them out on the hood to dry in the sun. At least the glove box was relatively protected. Evan attached the tow cables, testing the connections carefully. "Looks like it rolled down here rather than crashed. No frame damage that I can see. We'll need to drain fluids, dry everything out, check the engine thoroughly. If we're lucky, it'll be drivable in a few days. And if we're unlucky? Then you're dealing with the rental company's insurance, which is its own special nightmare." He stood up, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Let's get it up to the road first." The extraction went smoothly. Within 30 minutes, they had the sedan secured on the flatbed and were heading back to Morrison's auto shop. Maya followed in the truck, and Evan caught glimpses of Victoria in the rearview mirror, her face pressed to the window as they drove through downtown Meridian. The town was small, barely 15,000 people, with a main street of brick buildings housing local businesses. The auto shop sat on the edge of downtown, a metal building with 2 repair bays and a small office that always smelled like motor oil and coffee. Danny had left a note on the office door. "Bay 2 is yours. Good luck." They unloaded the car into the empty bay. Evan changed into his work coveralls while Victoria and Maya explored the shop with the curiosity of people who'd never spent time in such places. He found them examining Danny's wall of vintage tool calendars when he returned. "These are from the 50s and 60s, Maya said, pointing to the pin-up girls and classic cars. "Are they worth anything?" "To Danny, they are. He inherited them from his dad." Evan grabbed his diagnostic scanner. "Victoria, I need the keys. Let's see what we're dealing with." The next 2 hours passed in focused work. Evan checked every system, drained contaminated fluids, tested electrical components. Victoria surprised him by asking intelligent questions and actually helping when he needed an extra pair of hands. Maya eventually got bored and walked to the coffee shop down the street, returning with lattes and pastries. "Verdict?" Victoria asked as Evan wiped his hands on a rag. "Better than expected. The engine's fine, didn't take in water. We've got some electrical issues from moisture, and the interior's going to need serious drying out, but it's fixable. I can have it running in 2, maybe 3 days if I work on it after hours." Relief washed over Victoria's face. "Thank you, really. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know how else to express it." "You could start by explaining what really happened the night you ended up on that highway." The question had been nagging at Evan since they found the car. Because that vehicle didn't just roll down an embankment on its own. Something made you leave it. Victoria's expression closed off. "I told you, I don't remember clearly." "Try." She looked away, her jaw tight. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I was sitting in the car during the storm trying to figure out where to go, what to do. I'd been rejected by the last family member I had, and I was out of options, completely out. I had $40, no prospects, nowhere to go." Her hands clenched into fists. "I wasn't thinking clearly. The storm was so loud and I was so tired and I thought maybe it would be easier to walk into it. To let the storm take me." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. Evan felt his stomach drop. "You were going to kill yourself," he said quietly. "I was going to stop fighting. There's a difference." Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I got out of the car, walked toward the highway. I don't know if I was actually going to do anything or if I just needed to stand in the rain and feel something other than despair. But then there were headlights, and they were so bright, and I must have stumbled or slipped because the next thing I knew, I was falling. After that, nothing until I woke up in your house." "Jesus, Victoria. I know it was stupid and selfish and weak, but in that moment, I couldn't see any other way forward. I'd lost everything, my career, my family, my identity. I was sleeping in shelters and scrounging for work and being invisible to everyone who'd once treated me like I mattered. It felt like the universe was telling me I should just give up." Maya moved closer to Victoria, her young face serious. "But you didn't. You're still here." "Because your father found me. Because he made a choice to stop, to help, even though I'm the last person who deserved it." Victoria looked at Evan. "That's what I can't get past. You had every reason to drive by, to let karma finish what it started. But you didn't." Evan thought about that moment on the highway, the split-second decision to stop for a fallen stranger. "I don't know that I could have lived with myself if I'd driven past. That's not about you specifically. That's about who I am, who I need to be to look at myself in the mirror. Still, it matters. You saved my life and I destroyed yours. That's not an equation that balances. Maybe it's not supposed to balance." Evan surprised himself with the words even as he said them. "Maybe that's not how this works. You made terrible choices 10 years ago that hurt me. I made a good choice 2 nights ago that helped you. Those are separate things. They don't cancel each other out, but they don't have to define everything either." Victoria studied him with an intensity that felt like being seen through. "You've thought about this a lot, about forgiveness and moving forward." "Had to. Anger was eating me alive for a while there. I could either let it destroy me or I could find a way to live with what happened. I chose to live." He pulled off his coveralls and hung them on their hook. "But that doesn't mean I've forgotten, or that what you did doesn't matter. I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it." "Maybe not, but you deserve the chance to try to make things right." "That's different." They locked up the shop and drove back to the house in thoughtful silence. The conversation had shifted something between them, brought an honesty that was uncomfortable but necessary. Maya sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, processing what she'd learned about how close Victoria had come to giving up entirely. That afternoon, Victoria insisted on helping around the house despite her injuries. She folded laundry with Maya, helped Evan fix a leaky faucet in the bathroom, and made dinner, a simple pasta dish that was surprisingly good. Watching her move through his kitchen, Evan was struck by how quickly the surreal had become almost normal. After dinner, while Maya did homework at the kitchen table, Evan found Victoria standing at the living room window, staring out at the darkening street. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Thomas Jensen?" Her voice was hard. "I keep thinking about him, about how he's sitting in some minimum security prison, probably getting out early for good behavior, while we're both here dealing with the consequences of what he did. You want revenge. I want justice. There's a difference." Evan joined her at the window. "What would justice look like to you?" "I don't know. Him admitting what he did? Actually showing remorse? Him understanding the lives he destroyed?" Victoria's reflection in the glass looked tired and sad. "But men like Thomas don't feel remorse. They rationalize. They convince themselves they were justified, or that everyone does it, or that they're the real victims." "You've thought about confronting him?" It wasn't a question. Victoria's slight flinch confirmed it. "I looked into it. He's at a federal facility in Boise. They have visiting hours. I thought about going there, making him look at me and acknowledge what he did. But what would be the point? He'd just lie or deflect or find some way to make it my fault." "Maybe. Or maybe you'd get the closure you need." Victoria turned to face him directly. "Would you want to go? To confront him about what he did to you?" The question caught Evan off guard. He'd spent years trying not to think about Thomas Jensen, pushing the man to the periphery of his consciousness, because focusing on him meant dwelling on injustice he couldn't fix. But now, with Victoria here and the past suddenly present, the idea had weight. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Part of me wants to make him see what his lies cost me, my career, my marriage, years of my daughter's childhood where we struggled. But another part thinks it won't change anything. He'll still have done what he did. I'll still have lost what I lost." "But you'd know you stood up for yourself, that you didn't let him have the last word. Is that what you need, to stand up to him?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I need to look him in the eye and tell him he didn't break me. That despite everything, I survived. I'm still here, still fighting, still trying to do some good in the world. I need him to know he failed." There was strength in her voice that Evan recognized, the same strength that had helped her survive 18 months of homelessness and humiliation, the same strength that kept her moving forward when suicide had seemed like the easier option. "Then we should go," he heard himself say. "Both of us. We'll confront him together." Maya appeared in the doorway, homework forgotten. "You're going to see the guy who ruined your life?" "Maybe, if Victoria wants to." "I want to," Victoria said firmly. "But Evan, you don't have to do this. It's my burden to carry. He hurt both of us. We should face him together." Evan felt certainty settling over him like armor. "Besides, I have questions only he can answer, like, why me? Out of everyone at Lane Industries, why did he choose to frame me specifically?" "I never thought about that," Victoria admitted. "There were dozens of engineers at the company. He could have targeted anyone." "Exactly. So either it was random or there was a reason. I want to know which." They spent the rest of the evening researching the federal facility where Thomas Jensen was incarcerated. Visiting hours were Tuesday through Thursday, 2 to 4 in the afternoon. They'd need to register in advance, provide identification, follow specific protocols. It felt surreal, planning a prison visit to confront the man who'd orchestrated both their downfalls. "We should go Tuesday," Victoria said, studying the facility website on Maya's laptop. "That gives me 2 more days to recover, and you can finish the rental car so I have transportation afterward." The casual mention of leaving hit Evan unexpectedly hard. He'd gotten used to having Victoria in the house, to the strange dynamic of their forced coexistence. The thought of her leaving, returning to homelessness and uncertainty, sat wrong in his chest. "Where will you go?" he asked. "After Tuesday?" Victoria's fingers stilled on the keyboard. I don't know. Find another shelter, I guess. Maybe try Boise. It's bigger. Might have more opportunities. I can't stay here forever, Evan. You've already done more than enough. You could stay a little longer, Maya interjected, until you're really healed, and until we figure out that list we made, getting your documents, finding work, stuff like that. Maya, Victoria's voice cracked slightly. You're very kind, but I've imposed too much already. It's not imposing if we're inviting you. Maya looked at her father. Right, Dad? Evan found himself at a crossroads. The safe choice was to let Victoria leave as planned, to return to the uncomplicated life he'd built. But Maya was right. Sending an injured woman with nowhere to go back onto the streets felt wrong in ways he couldn't rationalize away. Stay through the week, he said finally, at least until we see Thomas and you're fully recovered. Then we'll reassess. The relief on Victoria's face was palpable. Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden. I can help around the house, maybe pick up some work in town if anyone's hiring. Let's get through Tuesday first, Evan interrupted. One crisis at a time. That night, Evan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the prison visit ahead. He'd spent 10 years believing Victoria Lane was the villain in his story, the person who'd destroyed everything he'd worked for. Learning the truth, that she'd been manipulated, that Thomas Jensen was the real architect of his downfall, had shifted the narrative in ways he was still processing. But knowing didn't automatically heal. Understanding why something happened didn't erase the pain of having lived through it. The years of struggle, the humiliation of downward mobility, the loss of his marriage, those scars remained, regardless of who'd wielded the knife. Still, there was something clarifying about having a target for his anger that actually deserved it. Thomas Jensen had looked him in the eye 10 years ago, had shaken his hand at company meetings, had praised his work on the Morrison project, all while planning to destroy him. That kind of calculated cruelty demanded confrontation. Sunday passed quietly. Evan worked on the rental car while Victoria and Maya tackled deep cleaning the house, a project that had been neglected during Evan's busy work schedule. He came home to find furniture rearranged, windows sparkling, and the smell of lemon cleaner everywhere. We got bored, Maya explained, and Victoria said cleaning is therapeutic. It is, Victoria confirmed, looking more animated than Evan had seen her. Gives you control when everything else feels chaotic. Plus, your house deserves some attention. When's the last time you cleaned behind the refrigerator? I don't want to talk about it. They ordered pizza for dinner and watched a movie. Some comedy Maya had been wanting to see. Evan found himself laughing genuinely, the tension of the past days easing slightly. Victoria laughed too, and in those moments, she seemed almost like a normal person, not a former CEO or a fallen executive, just someone watching a silly movie and enjoying simple company. Monday brought nervous energy. The prison visit was scheduled for 2 p.m. the next day, which meant they'd need to leave by noon to account for the drive and security procedures. Evan finished the rental car that morning, replacing a few electrical components and doing a final systems check. The vehicle started smoothly, running like nothing had ever been wrong. She's ready, he told Victoria that afternoon. Want to take her for a test drive? They drove through downtown Meridian with Victoria behind the wheel, reacquainting herself with the feel of the car. Evan directed her toward the outskirts of town, to the neighborhood where he and Maya used to live before the foreclosure. This is it, he said as they passed a modest 2-story house with a large yard. That was ours, the blue one with the maple tree in front. Victoria slowed to look. It's lovely. Yeah, we were happy there. For a while. Evan stared at the tree he'd planted the year Maya was born, now towering over the roof. Sometimes I'd drive past just to see it, remind myself it was real, that I didn't dream the whole thing. Do you regret it, the life you lost? Every day. But I don't regret who I became because of losing it. Does that make sense? Victoria nodded slowly. It does. I regret destroying my father's company. I regret trusting Thomas. I regret not being brave enough or smart enough to see what was happening. But I don't regret what survival taught me. I know things now about resilience, about human nature, about what actually matters, that I never would have learned from the top of the corporate ladder. They drove back in thoughtful silence. The conversation had revealed another layer of unexpected common ground. Both of them had been broken by circumstances tied to Thomas Jensen, and both had found strange wisdom in the wreckage. That evening, they planned the next day's confrontation. Maya offered to come along for moral support, but Evan firmly vetoed that idea. "This isn't something you need to see or be part of," he told his daughter. "You've got school anyway. We'll tell you all about it afterward. Promise you'll be safe? Prison visits seem sketchy. It's a minimum security federal facility, not Alcatraz. We'll be fine." But that night, lying in his bed while Victoria slept on the couch and Maya was safe in her room, Evan felt the weight of what they were about to do. Confronting the man who'd destroyed his life felt simultaneously necessary and terrifying. What if Thomas was unrepentant? What if he laughed at them? What if the confrontation brought no closure, just more pain? He thought about Victoria's determination to tell Thomas he hadn't broken her. That took courage, standing before your destroyer and claiming victory over their worst intentions. Evan wanted that courage too. Wanted to look Thomas Jensen in the eye and show him that despite everything, despite the calculated cruelty and the stolen decade, Evan Cole had survived, had built something good, had raised an incredible daughter and maintained his integrity and remained capable of compassion even toward those who'd hurt him most. That was the real victory. Not career success or financial security, but remaining fundamentally decent in the face of profound injustice. Thomas Jensen had taken many things from Evan, but he hadn't taken that, couldn't take it, because it wasn't his to steal. Morning came bright and cold. Evan dressed carefully, not quite formal, but respectful. Dark jeans, a button-down shirt, his good leather jacket. Victoria emerged from the bathroom in similar attire, her hair pulled back and minimal makeup highlighting features that were slowly regaining their natural refinement as she recovered. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's go anyway." They dropped Maya at school with promises to text updates, then drove toward Boise. The federal facility was about an hour away, giving them plenty of time to arrive early. Neither spoke much during the drive, both lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The prison was exactly what Evan expected. Institutional beige buildings surrounded by fencing, security checkpoints at the entrance, an atmosphere of controlled sterility. They went through registration, surrendered their phones and personal items, submitted to security screening. The guards were professional but detached, having processed thousands of visitors and long past finding any individual story compelling. They were directed to a visiting room that looked like a school cafeteria, tables bolted to the floor, plastic chairs, vending machines along one wall. Other visitors sat at various tables, talking quietly with inmates in khaki uniforms. The whole scene felt surreal. "Mr. Cole?" "Ms. Lane," a guard approached with a clipboard. "Thomas Jensen will be brought out shortly. You'll have 1 hour. Keep conversation appropriate. No physical contact. If there are problems, raise your hand and we'll intervene. Understood?" They both nodded. Evan's heart hammered in his chest as they chose a table in the corner, relatively private but still visible to the guards. Victoria sat beside him rather than across, presenting a united front. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "whatever he says, remember why we came. To tell our truth. That's all we can control." Before Evan could respond, a door opened and Thomas Jensen walked through it. 10 years had changed the man. Evan remembered him as robust and confident, with silver hair and expensive suits that screamed success. The man shuffling toward them was diminished, thinner, grayer, shoulders hunched in the defensive posture of someone who'd learned to make himself small. But his eyes were the same, sharp and calculating, assessing them even as he approached. "Well," Thomas said as he sat down across from them, his voice carrying false joviality. "This is unexpected. Victoria Lane and... I'm sorry, I don't recall your name." "Evan Cole, lead engineer on the Morrison project, the man you framed for embezzlement 10 years ago." Recognition flickered across Thomas's face, followed quickly by something that might have been irritation. "Ah, yes, the engineer. I wondered if you'd ever figure it out." The casual admission hit like a slap. No denial, no pretense, just acknowledgement delivered with the boredom of someone discussing the weather. Victoria leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "That's it? That's all you have to say? You destroyed his career, stole millions from my company, and you're acting like it was nothing? Thomas shrugged, the gesture infuriating in its indifference. It was business, Victoria. Nothing personal. You were in over your head running the company, and Cole here was too smart for his own good. I needed someone to take the fall for the financial discrepancies, and he was convenient. Convenient? Evan's hands clenched into fists under the table. You destroyed my life because I was convenient? Oh, don't be dramatic. I didn't destroy anything. You rebuilt, didn't you? Found work somewhere. That's what people do. They adapt. Thomas's smile was patronizing. If anything, I probably did you a favor. Engineering is cutthroat. Maybe you weren't tough enough for it anyway. The words were designed to wound, to belittle. Evan felt rage surge through him, hot and immediate. But then he felt Victoria's hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that said, wait, breathe, don't give him the satisfaction. You haven't asked why we came, Victoria said, her voice deadly calm. Aren't you curious? Not particularly. I assume you want to yell at me, tell me I'm a terrible person, maybe cry about how I ruined your lives. Save your breath. I've heard it all before. We came to tell you something important. Victoria leaned back and Evan saw the steel in her spine, the CEO she'd once been emerging through the damage. We came to tell you that you failed. Thomas's smirk faltered slightly. Excuse me? You tried to break us, both of us. You framed Evan to cover your crimes, then you bled my company dry and left me holding the blame. You probably thought we'd be destroyed forever, that we'd disappear into obscurity and misery while you enjoyed your stolen millions. But here we are, Thomas. Still standing, still fighting, still refusing to let what you did define who we are. I'm in prison, Thomas said flatly. How exactly did I fail? Because prison has an end date for you, 4 years, maybe less with good behavior. Then you're free, with whatever money you manage to hide. But Evan and I were already free. Free from the weight of carrying lies. Free from pretending to be something we're not. Free from the kind of moral rot that lets someone destroy innocent people without remorse. Evan found his voice, the rage crystallizing into something clearer. I spent 10 years angry at Victoria for firing me. 10 years believing she was the villain, but she was just another one of your victims, someone you manipulated and used. The real villain was you all along. How touching, Thomas said dryly. You've bonded over shared trauma. Congratulations. We have, Victoria agreed, and that's something you'll never understand. You don't know what it's like to hit bottom and claw your way back up. You don't know what it's like to lose everything and discover you're stronger than you thought. You certainly don't know what it's like to be truly forgiven by someone you've wronged. She looked at Evan as she said this last part, and he understood what she was asking. Not for absolution, that wasn't his to give, but for acknowledgement that they'd found something unexpected in this nightmare. Understanding, maybe. The beginnings of mutual respect. I don't forgive you, Victoria, Evan said clearly, making sure Thomas heard every word. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did hurt me in ways I'm still processing. But I understand now that you were working with bad information, that you thought you were doing the right thing. That doesn't erase the harm, but it changes the story. And the real story, the truth, is that this man sitting across from us is responsible for both our downfalls. Thomas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You came all this way to tell me I'm a bad person? To announce that you've survived? Who cares? I don't. Your survival or destruction means nothing to me. You were means to an end, both of you, nothing more. And that's the difference between us, Victoria said softly. We see people as people. You see them as tools. That's why you're in here and we're out there. That's why we'll rebuild our lives and you'll spend the rest of yours knowing that you traded everything, freedom, reputation, human connection, for money you can't even spend. Thomas's face had gone hard. The mask of joviality completely dropped. Are we done here? Because this little therapy session is boring me. Almost. Evan leaned forward. One question. Why me? Why did you specifically choose to frame me? For the first time, something like genuine emotion crossed Thomas's face. You want the truth? You were going to cost me everything. The Morrison Project was brilliant, revolutionary. If it succeeded, Lane Industries would have exploded in value, and there would have been audits, expansions, investor oversight. My embezzlement would have been discovered within months. So I had to make sure the project failed. And the easiest way to do that was to remove the one person who could actually make it work. The admission hung in the air. It wasn't random. Evan hadn't been convenient. He'd been targeted specifically because he was too good at his job. You destroyed my career because I was about to succeed, Evan said slowly. I destroyed your career because your success threatened mine. Basic self-preservation. Thomas stood up, signaling the guards. But look on the bright side. At least you know it wasn't personal. You were just collateral damage in a bigger game. No, Victoria said, standing as well. He was a human being whose life mattered. And the fact that you can't see that you still think in terms of games and collateral damage, proves you learned nothing from any of this. The guards approached to escort Thomas back. He paused, looking at them both with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. It was hard to tell. You think you've won something by coming here, but you haven't. I took a decade from both of you. 10 years you'll never get back. That's my legacy. Not this prison, not the conviction, the time I stole. Sleep well with that knowledge. He turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the visiting room with those final words echoing in the space he'd vacated. Evan felt something inside him break and reform simultaneously. Thomas was right. The lost decade couldn't be recovered. The Morrison project would never happen. The life he'd planned was gone forever. But Thomas was also profoundly wrong, because the decade wasn't stolen if Evan had lived it, learned from it, grown through it. Time wasn't just taken. It was transformed into something Thomas could never understand: resilience, character, the ability to find meaning in survival itself. Beside him, Victoria was shaking, with rage or relief, or perhaps both. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and bright. I expected to feel different after confronting him, she said quietly. I thought there'd be this moment of catharsis, of closure. But I just feel empty. Not empty, Evan corrected. Free. He doesn't have power over us anymore. We've seen who he really is, petty and unrepentant and small, and we've seen that we survived despite him. That's worth something. They collected their belongings and walked out into the cold afternoon. The sky was overcast, threatening snow. Evan took a deep breath of free air and felt the weight that had been pressing on his chest for years ease slightly. Not gone, maybe never completely gone, but lighter. Thank you for coming with me, Victoria said as they reached the car. I wouldn't have had the courage to face him alone. Thank you for telling me the truth, for explaining what really happened. I spent 10 years hating the wrong person. You weren't wrong to hate me, Evan. I still made the choices I made. But you didn't do it with malice. That matters. It doesn't excuse it, but it matters. They drove away from the prison in silence, both processing what had just happened. The confrontation hadn't brought the dramatic closure or satisfaction that movies promised. Thomas Jensen was still the same selfish, unrepentant man he'd always been. But they'd done what they came to do, stood before their destroyer and claimed their survival, refused to be ashamed, insisted on being seen. Halfway home, Victoria suddenly said, "He's wrong, you know, about the stolen decade. Time isn't stolen if you lived it. And you lived it beautifully, Evan. You raised an incredible daughter. You maintained your integrity. You became someone capable of saving the life of your enemy. That's not collateral damage. That's victory." Evan felt tears prick his eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. I wanted my old life back so badly for so long. The career, the house, the future I'd planned. But you're right. What I built instead has value. Different value, maybe, but real. And not finished yet. You could still have more. A new career, new possibilities. The past is gone, but the future isn't written. Is that what you're going to do? Start over again? I have to. I don't have the luxury of giving up. Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. But this time I'll do it right. No cutting corners, no trusting the wrong people, no sacrificing others for convenience. This time I'll build something that actually helps people rather than just enriching myself. Like what? I don't know yet, but something. Something that matters. They pulled into Evan's driveway as the first snowflakes began to fall. The house looked warm and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows. Maya appeared on the porch before they'd even gotten out of the car, bouncing with barely contained curiosity. "So?" she demanded. "What happened? Was he sorry? Did he apologize?" "No," Evan said simply. "He wasn't, and he didn't." "But that's okay. We didn't go there for his apology. We went there for ourselves." Inside, over hot chocolate and the last of the morning's pastries, they told Maya everything. Thomas's indifference, his admission that he'd targeted Evan specifically, his complete lack of remorse. Maya listened with the focused attention she brought to important things. "He sounds like a psychopath," she concluded. "Maybe," Victoria agreed, "or maybe just someone who convinced himself over time that other people don't really matter. Either way, he's not our problem anymore." "So what now?" Maya looked between them. "What happens next?" Evan and Victoria exchanged glances. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. What did happen next? They'd confronted their shared past, stood together against their destroyer. But the future remained uncertain, full of complications and unanswered questions. "Now," Evan said slowly, "we figure out the next step, together, maybe, or separately, but we figure it out." It wasn't a complete answer, but it was honest, and for now, honesty felt like enough. The days following the prison visit settled into an unexpected rhythm. Victoria remained in the house, ostensibly recovering but increasingly integrated into their daily routines. She made breakfast while Evan got ready for work, helped Maya with college application essays in the evenings, and spent her afternoons researching something on Maya's laptop that she wouldn't quite explain yet. By Friday, a week after the storm that had brought her into their lives, Victoria looked almost healthy. The bruises had faded to yellow-green shadows, the cut on her head was healing cleanly, and she moved without the painful stiffness of those first days. But she also looked restless, like someone approaching a deadline they couldn't quite articulate. Evan found her on the porch that evening, wrapped in one of his old jackets against the October chill, staring out at the quiet street. "You're thinking about leaving," he said, joining her on the steps. Victoria didn't deny it. "I should. I've been here almost 10 days. You've done more than enough, more than I had any right to expect. It's time I stopped imposing on your hospitality and figured out my own path forward." "Where would you go?" "Boise, probably. Bigger city, more opportunities. I could find shelter space, look for work. I've done it before." Her voice carried determination, but not enthusiasm. "I'll be fine, Evan. I'm a survivor." "You shouldn't have to just survive, though. Not when there might be better options." Victoria turned to look at him, curiosity sparking in those pale blue eyes. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about helping displaced workers, people who've lost their careers through no fault of their own. People like us." Evan pulled out his phone and showed her the notes he'd been making during slow moments at the shop. What if there was a place, a nonprofit organization, that helped people in that situation? Job training, resume building, interview coaching, mental health support, a safety net for people falling through the cracks. Victoria took his phone, reading through his notes with growing intensity. This is actually brilliant. A comprehensive support system specifically designed for mid-career professionals who've been displaced. Nobody's doing this. Because it's expensive and complicated and would require someone with business experience to actually make it work. Evan met her gaze directly. "Someone like you." The implication hung in the air between them. Victoria handed back his phone slowly, her expression unreadable. "You want me to build this?" "That's what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting that you have skills and experience that could help a lot of people, and that maybe this is how you make things right, not by punishing yourself with homelessness and minimum wage work, but by using what you learned from falling to help others climb back up." "Evan, I appreciate the thought, but I have no money, no resources, no credibility left in the business world. I can't start a nonprofit with $40 and good intentions." "No, but you could start small, right here in Meridian." Evan had been planning this conversation for days, thinking through the logistics. "There's an abandoned community center on 3rd Street. It's been sitting empty for 2 years since the city couldn't afford to maintain it. What if we approach the city council about using it? We could start with basic services, just helping people with resumes and job applications. Build from there." Victoria was shaking her head, but Evan could see the spark in her eyes. The same spark he imagined she'd once had when building her father's company into something real. And who would fund this operation? Who would trust me to run it? The community might, if they saw what you're trying to do. And I'd vouch for you. Evan surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. I know that doesn't count for much. I'm just a mechanic. But people here know me. Trust me. If I said you were worth supporting, some of them would listen. You barely trust me yourself. Why would you put your reputation on the line for me? It was a fair question. Evan thought about the past 10 days, watching Victoria slowly piece herself back together, seeing her interact with Maya with genuine warmth, hearing her story of survival and loss. He thought about the prison visit, about standing together before their shared destroyer. Most of all, he thought about the conversation in his truck the day they'd recovered her rental car, when she'd talked about regret and resilience and building something that actually mattered. Because I think you mean it, he said finally. When you talk about wanting to help people, about doing things right this time, I believe you, and because Maya's right. Holding on to anger doesn't heal anything, but maybe working together towards something good might. Victoria's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back determinedly. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. Before Victoria could respond, the screen door opened and Maya emerged with her laptop. Sorry to interrupt, but you guys need to see this. She set the laptop on the porch railing, angled so they could both see the screen. It showed a news article from 3 days ago, a business journal piece about Thomas Jensen's embezzlement case and its aftermath. This mentions you, Dad, Maya said, pointing. Look, third paragraph. Evan read aloud. Among Jensen's victims was Evan Cole, a promising engineer who was fired and blacklisted based on falsified evidence. Cole's groundbreaking work on the Morrison manufacturing project was effectively buried when Jensen framed him for embezzlement to cover his own crimes. Industry analysts suggest that if the Morrison project had proceeded, it could have revolutionized domestic manufacturing processes. The words sat heavy in the cold evening air. Evan read them twice more, trying to process, seeing his name in print, associated with something other than failure. There's more, Maya said excitedly. I've been searching your name combined with Thomas Jensen all week. There are 6 different articles that mention what happened to you. Your story is out there, Dad. The truth is documented. The blacklist doesn't exist anymore. Victoria was reading over his shoulder, and Evan heard her sharp intake of breath. Maya's right. This changes everything. With this kind of documentation, you could approach companies again. You could go back to engineering. After 10 years out of the field, I'd be so far behind. You'd have a learning curve, sure, but you'd also have experience in problem solving and adaptability that most engineers don't develop, and you'd have proof that you were wrongfully accused. Victoria's voice grew stronger, more animated. Evan, you could get your career back. Not the exact same career, maybe, but something in the field you love. I have responsibilities. Maya's college, the mortgage, steady income from the shop. I know. I'm not saying quit tomorrow. But you could start exploring options. Send out some resumes, take some calls, see what's possible. Victoria gripped his arm. Don't let Thomas Jensen steal another decade because you're afraid to hope. The words struck deep. Evan had gotten comfortable in his small life, had convinced himself that accepting less was the same as finding peace. But Maya's eager face and Victoria's intensity reminded him that sometimes accepting less was just another word for giving up. I'll think about it, he said, echoing his words to Victoria. Both things. The nonprofit idea and my career. I'll think about all of it. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed scrolling through the articles Maya had found, reading documentation of his innocence that had come far too late to prevent the destruction, but might not be too late to enable rebuilding. The words promising engineer and groundbreaking work felt alien applied to him now, like descriptions of someone he used to be. Around midnight, he heard movement in the living room. He found Victoria sitting in the darkness, her own laptop open, the screen's glow illuminating her face. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. I started researching your nonprofit idea. I couldn't help myself. She turned the screen toward him. Look, there are grant programs specifically for workforce development initiatives. Federal money, state money, private foundation money. If we could put together a solid proposal, we might actually be able to fund this thing. Evan sat down beside her, studying the websites she'd found. You're serious about this? I think I am. It feels right in a way nothing has felt right in years. Victoria pulled up a document she'd been drafting. I've been outlining a mission statement. Listen to this. The Second Chance Initiative provides comprehensive support to mid-career professionals displaced by circumstances beyond their control, offering job training, emotional support, and community resources to facilitate successful reintegration into the workforce. What do you think? I think it's good, really good. But Victoria, this is a massive undertaking. It would consume your life. My life right now consists of shelter beds and day labor. This would be an improvement. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm good at building organizations. It's what I was trained to do. I just need to do it right this time, with transparency and ethics, and actual concern for the people involved. You'd need a board of directors, financial oversight, all the things that could have prevented what Thomas did. Exactly. We build in accountability from the start. Make it impossible for anyone to abuse their position. Victoria's fingers flew across the keyboard, adding notes. And we'd need community buy-in. Local businesses willing to hire our clients, volunteers to help with training, donations of money and resources. That's where my reputation comes in, Evan said, understanding clicking into place. I approach the community. You design the systems. We work together. Partners, Victoria said softly, in actually helping people rather than destroying them. The word felt significant, weighty with possibility and risk. Partners meant trust, collaboration, shared risk. It meant Evan would be publicly associating himself with Victoria Lane, whose name still carried stigma despite her innocence. It meant gambling his carefully rebuilt stability on something uncertain, but it also meant possibility, purpose, a chance to transform their shared tragedy into something meaningful. Okay, he said. Let's do this. Let's actually try to build something good out of all this wreckage. Victoria's smile was brilliant and genuine, the first time Evan had seen her look truly happy. Thank you for believing this is possible, for believing I'm capable of doing better. Don't make me regret it, he said, but his tone was light. They worked until 3 a.m, outlining plans and researching grant requirements and drafting mission statements. By the time Evan finally fell into bed, his mind was buzzing with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in a decade. The next morning at breakfast, they presented their idea to Maya, who listened with the serious attention she brought to important matters. So basically, you want to start a nonprofit to help people like Dad who got screwed over by circumstances? She summarized. That's the simplified version, yes, Victoria confirmed. And you need community support to make it work? We do. Money, volunteers, partnerships with local businesses. It's ambitious. Maya thought for a moment, then grinned. I know where to start. Mrs. Patterson. Who's Mrs. Patterson? Victoria asked. The principal at Maya's high school, Evan explained. She's been in Meridian forever, knows everyone, sits on half the boards in town. And she loves Dad because he's been coaching the junior robotics team for free for 3 years, Maya added. If you could get her on board, she could help recruit other community leaders. It was a good idea, strategic and practical. Evan made a note to call Mrs. Patterson on Monday. What about the community center? Maya continued. The abandoned one on 3rd Street? How do you get permission to use it? City council meeting, Victoria said. They meet the second Tuesday of every month. We could present a proposal, ask for permission to lease the building for minimal cost in exchange for providing community services. That's in 4 days, Evan pointed out. We don't have time to prepare a proper presentation. Then we'd better work fast. Victoria's eyes held determination Evan recognized from his engineering days, the look of someone who'd identified a problem and refused to walk away until it was solved. Maya, can you help me put together slides? Evan, you focus on writing the community impact statement. We'll divide and conquer. The weekend transformed into a flurry of activity. Victoria and Maya commandeered the kitchen table, building a presentation that explained the need, outlined the solution, and projected community benefits. Evan worked at the shop during the day but spent evenings calling contacts. Danny Morrison, Mrs. Patterson, other people he'd built relationships with over the past decade. He explained the idea, asked for letters of support, felt vulnerable in a way he hadn't since begging for employment 10 years ago. Mrs. Patterson agreed to attend the council meeting and speak on their behalf. Danny offered the auto shop as a training site for people wanting to learn basic mechanical skills. 3 other local business owners pledged support, a restaurant willing to hire through their program, an accounting firm offering free financial consulting, a law office providing pro bono legal services. By Monday evening, they had a 15-page proposal, 12 letters of support, and a presentation that Victoria had polished to professional perfection. They also had something else, a sense of shared purpose that felt almost like friendship. "This is insane," Evan said, reviewing the materials one final time. "We met less than 2 weeks ago under the worst possible circumstances, and now we're launching a nonprofit together." "Insane or inspired?" Victoria countered. "I genuinely can't tell anymore." "Maybe both." Evan looked at the woman sitting across from him, transformed from the broken, desperate person he'd found on the highway into someone focused and determined and alive with purpose. "You know, if this actually works, if the council approves and we get funding, you'd need to stay in Meridian. Long term." "I know. And you'd be working with me. Probably daily, despite everything that's between us." "I know that too." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "Is that a problem for you?" Evan considered the question honestly. 2 weeks ago, the idea of working with Victoria Lane would have been unthinkable. But the woman who'd manipulated him wasn't the same woman sitting in his kitchen, nervously organizing presentation materials and believing fiercely that they could help people. Time and suffering had transformed her, just as they'd transformed him. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'm willing to find out." The city council met in a small room in the municipal building downtown. 20 folding chairs faced a raised table where 5 council members sat, looking bored and slightly suspicious as Evan and Victoria approached the microphone during the public comment period. Evan recognized 2 of the council members, Martha Brennan, who ran the hardware store, and James Liu, who owned the pharmacy. Both knew him casually from years of small-town interactions. He hoped that familiarity would help. "Good evening," Victoria began, her voice steady and professional despite the nerves Evan knew she was feeling. "My name is Victoria Lane, and this is Evan Cole. We're here tonight to present a proposal for a workforce development nonprofit that would serve Meridian and the surrounding communities." She clicked to the first slide, a stark statistic about displaced workers in Idaho. Then another showing the gap in services for mid-career professionals. Evan watched the council members' faces shift from boredom to interest as Victoria laid out the need with clarity and passion. The Second Chance initiative would provide comprehensive support to people who've lost their careers through no fault of their own, Victoria continued. Job retraining, resume assistance, interview coaching, mental health support, and job placement services. We're requesting permission to lease the vacant community center on 3rd Street for minimal cost, with the understanding that we'd provide these services free of charge to community members. She yielded the microphone to Evan, who explained their funding strategy: grants, donations, partnerships with local businesses. He spoke about the letters of support they'd gathered, the commitments from business owners to provide training and employment opportunities. "This isn't just about helping individuals," Evan said, looking directly at Martha Brennan. "It's about strengthening our entire community. Every person we help get back on their feet is someone who can contribute to Meridian's economy, support local businesses, and give back to their neighbors. We're investing in people, and that's always a sound investment." Mrs. Patterson stood from the audience to speak, lending her considerable community credibility to their proposal. She talked about Evan's years of volunteer work, his character, his commitment to young people in the robotics program. She carefully avoided mentioning Victoria's past, focusing instead on the quality of the proposal itself. The council members asked questions about insurance, about liability, about operational costs and sustainability. Victoria fielded them with the competence of someone who'd once run a multi-million-dollar company, demonstrating knowledge without arrogance. Evan watched her and felt something shift in his chest. This was who she was supposed to be, someone using her considerable skills to build rather than destroy. After 30 minutes of discussion, the council excused them to deliberate. Evan and Victoria sat in the hallway, both too nervous to speak. Maya had stayed home to finish homework, but had texted 17 times asking for updates. Whatever happens, Victoria said quietly, thank you for trying. For believing this was worth the effort. It is worth it. Whether they approve tonight or not, this is important work that needs doing. The door opened and Martha Brennan gestured them back inside. The council members' faces were unreadable as everyone settled back into position. Miss Lane, Mr. Cole, James Liu began, the council has reviewed your proposal and discussed the matter. We have some concerns about insurance liability and building maintenance costs. Evan's heart sank. This was how rejection always started, with reasonable concerns that became insurmountable obstacles. However, Liu continued, we also recognize the significant need for these services in our community. We're prepared to approve a 6-month trial lease of the 3rd Street Community Center at a rate of $1 per month, with the understanding that you'll maintain adequate insurance and keep the building in good repair. After 6 months, we'll reassess based on community impact and program success. Victoria's hand found Evan's under the table, squeezing hard. He squeezed back, both of them trying to process what they'd just heard. That's yes? Victoria said. You're approving it? We're approving a trial period, Martha Brennan clarified, but she was smiling. Show us what you can do with 6 months. Help some people. Make a difference. Then we'll talk about a longer-term arrangement. They practically floated out of the municipal building. On the sidewalk, Victoria grabbed Evan's arms, her face alight with joy. We did it! We actually did it! We got a chance to do it, Evan corrected, but he was grinning too. Now comes the hard part, actually making it work. They called Maya from the parking lot, both talking over each other in their excitement. Then they drove to the community center on 3rd Street to see their new space. The building was smaller than Evan remembered, a single-story structure of faded brick with large windows and a sign that still read Meridian Community Center, though the paint was peeling. The grass around it had grown wild, and one of the windows was cracked, but the bones were solid. It needs work, Victoria said, walking the perimeter. A lot of work. Cleaning, painting, repairs. We'll need furniture, computers, supplies. We'll figure it out. That's what we do. We figure things out. Evan tried the front door and found it locked. I'll get the keys from the city tomorrow, then we can start planning the renovation. They stood together in front of the building as dusk fell, both contemplating the enormity of what they'd undertaken. 6 months to prove the concept, to help enough people that the council would see value in making the arrangement permanent. 6 months to transform personal tragedy into community benefit. I'm scared, Victoria admitted. What if we fail? What if we can't help anyone, or we run out of money, or people don't trust me enough to participate? Then we fail having tried something meaningful. That's better than not trying at all. Evan looked at the building. Their building now, for the next 6 months at least. But I don't think we're going to fail. I think we're going to help a lot of people, and it's going to be hard and messy and complicated, but it's going to matter. Victoria nodded slowly, her fear transforming into determination. Okay. We can do this. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Evan took a week of vacation from the shop to focus on renovation work. Victoria coordinated volunteers. Mrs. Patterson recruited parents from the high school. Danny brought his sons. Even some of Evan's co-workers showed up with paint supplies and tools. Maya organized a social media campaign that brought in donations of furniture, computers, office supplies. The transformation was remarkable. The tired, abandoned building became clean and welcoming. Fresh paint covered the walls in warm, inviting colors. Donated desks and chairs filled what would become the counseling area. A corner was set up with computers for resume writing and job applications. Another space became a small library of professional development books. Victoria worked alongside everyone else, painting walls and assembling furniture without complaint. Evan watched her interact with the volunteers, thanking them genuinely, listening to their suggestions, treating everyone with respect regardless of their station. This was the leader she should have been 10 years ago before Thomas Jensen's corruption twisted her priorities. 2 days before their planned opening, Evan found Victoria sitting alone in what would be her office, a small room with a window overlooking the street. She was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the space. Hey, he said gently, kneeling beside her chair. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. Nothing's wrong. Everything is coming together. People are helping. The community is supporting us. And I don't deserve any of it. Her voice broke. I destroyed your life, Evan. I made decisions that hurt you and Maya terribly, and instead of punishing me, you're helping me build something good. Why? Why would you do that? Evan was quiet for a moment, thinking about forgiveness and grace and the complicated mathematics of mercy. Because punishment doesn't heal anything, he said finally. I spent 10 years angry, and it didn't undo what happened. It didn't restore what I lost. It just made me bitter and tired and smaller than I wanted to be. But this, helping people, building something meaningful with someone who understands what it's like to fall, this feels like healing. For both of us. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what I did to you. Maybe that's not your job. Maybe your job is to do better going forward, to use what you learned from falling to help others climb back up, to be the person you wish you'd been 10 years ago. Evan reached out and took her hand, a gesture of friendship, of partnership. You can't change the past, Victoria. None of us can. But we can choose what we build from the wreckage. She squeezed his hand, fresh tears falling. Thank you. For second chances I don't deserve, for believing I can be better. You're already better. You just need to believe it yourself. The Second Chance Initiative opened on a Monday morning in November. They'd sent out flyers, posted on social media, contacted the local newspaper. Evan and Victoria arrived early, both nervous about whether anyone would actually show up. By 9 a.m., 7 people stood outside the door. Men and women of various ages, all carrying the particular kind of tension that came with unemployment and uncertainty. Evan recognized one of them, Bill Harmon, who'd been laid off when the lumber mill closed 6 months ago. The others were strangers, but their stories were likely similar. Good people hit by bad circumstances, looking for a way back. Welcome, Victoria said, unlocking the door. Thank you for coming. Please, come in. We have coffee and pastries, and we're here to help however we can. The first day was chaotic but hopeful. They conducted intake interviews, assessed skills and needs, started matching people with resources. Victoria's organizational skills shone as she created systems on the fly. Evan found himself connecting with the clients easily. His own experience with job loss made him credible in ways formal credentials never could. By the end of the week, they had 15 clients enrolled. By the end of the first month, 43. Each one represented a person who'd fallen through society's cracks and was trying to climb back out. Each one was someone Evan and Victoria could help in ways that felt redemptive. The work was exhausting. Evan was splitting time between the shop and the nonprofit, working 12-hour days trying to manage both. Victoria lived at the center, arriving before dawn and leaving after dark, pouring herself into every detail. But there was joy in it too, the joy of meaningful work, of visible impact, of lives actually changing. 3 months in, they placed their first client in permanent employment. Bill Harmon got hired as a supervisor at a construction company, using skills Victoria had helped him articulate on his resume. He came back to thank them, shaking Evan's hand and hugging Victoria with tears in his eyes. "You gave me my life back," he said simply. "I didn't think that was possible." After he left, Evan found Victoria in her office again, crying again, but this time from happiness rather than guilt. "We did that," she said wonderingly. "We actually helped someone." "We did, and we're going to help a lot more." The 6-month review with the city council approached faster than expected. They prepared a comprehensive report. 43 clients served, 12 permanent placements, 27 in active job training programs, letters of support from clients, from employers, from community members who'd seen the difference the center made. The night before the council meeting, Evan couldn't sleep again. He found himself on the porch, staring at the stars and thinking about the strange journey that had brought him here. 10 years ago, he'd lost everything. 2 weeks ago, no, it had been almost 6 months now, though the early days felt like yesterday, Victoria Lane had literally crashed into his life. And now they were partners in something meaningful, something that was changing lives, including their own. The screen door opened. Victoria joined him, wrapped in a blanket against the spring chill. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Nervous about tomorrow." "Me too, but Evan, regardless of what the council decides, this has been worth it. These 6 months of actually helping people, of building something good together, it's been worth every moment. We're going to get approved," Evan said with more confidence than he felt. The numbers are strong. The community support is real. They'd be foolish to shut us down. I hope you're right. They sat in comfortable silence, to two people who'd been enemies and victims and were now something more complicated and more valuable. Partners in redemption, friends forged in the fires of shared suffering and shared purpose. I never thanked you, Victoria said quietly, for stopping that night, for saving my life when you had every reason to drive past. You've thanked me 100 times. I know, but I mean it differently now. Then I was grateful for physical rescue. Now I understand you saved more than my life. You saved my chance at redemption, at becoming someone worth being. She looked at him in the starlight. You showed me that grace is real, that second chances exist, that people can choose compassion over revenge. That's a gift I can never repay. You're repaying it every day. Every person we help is you repaying it. Maybe, but it still feels like I owe you something more, something personal. Evan turned to look at her fully. In the months since that stormy night, Victoria had continued to transform. She'd gained healthy weight, her hair shone, her eyes held life and purpose. She looked like herself again, or perhaps like the self she was always meant to become. You don't owe me anything, he said gently. But if you want to give me something, give me this. Keep being the person you've become. Keep choosing to build rather than destroy. Keep believing that people matter and that second chances are real. That's what I want from you. Victoria nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks again. Happy tears this time. Tears of gratitude and relief and hope. I can do that, she whispered. I want to do that. The city council meeting the next day was packed. Clients filled the seats, along with volunteers, employers who'd partnered with them, and community members who'd watched the center's growth. Mrs. Patterson was there, and Danny and Maya sitting in the front row with her phone ready to record. The council reviewed their report with serious faces. James Liu asked detailed questions about sustainability and growth plans. Martha Brennan wanted to know about long-term funding strategies. But their questions felt different this time. Not skeptical obstacles, but genuine engagement with how to make the program permanent. After an hour of discussion, the council voted. 5-0 in favor of extending the lease indefinitely at the same minimal rate, recognizing the Second Chance Initiative as an official community resource. The room erupted in applause. Victoria grabbed Evan's hand, squeezing so hard it hurt, both of them grinning like fools. They'd done it. They'd taken tragedy and trauma and transformed it into something lasting and good. Outside after the meeting, surrounded by congratulations and celebration, Evan found a quiet moment with Maya. You did good, Dad, she said, hugging him tight. Really good. I'm proud of you. I had help. A lot of help. From the person who destroyed your career. Who would have guessed that would work out? Maya's smile was wry. Life is weird. Life is weird, Evan agreed. But sometimes weird turns out okay. He looked over at Victoria, who was being thanked by Bill Harmon again, her face glowing with genuine happiness. The destroyed CEO had become a builder of second chances. The vengeful victim had become a partner in redemption. And somehow, impossibly, it had all started with the simple choice to stop for a stranger on a stormy night. Grace, Evan thought, was the most powerful force in the universe. More powerful than revenge, stronger than justice, more transformative than punishment. Grace took broken things and made them new. Grace turned enemies into friends and tragedy into triumph. And grace, he was learning, wasn't something you earned or deserved. It was something you chose to give and to receive, over and over, until the giving and receiving transformed everyone involved into better versions of themselves. That night, after all the celebrations ended, the three of them, Evan, Victoria, and Maya, sat together in the living room where Victoria had first woken after being rescued. 6 months had passed since that stormy night, but it felt like a lifetime. So what's next? Maya asked. You've got the center permanently. What's the next goal? Victoria and Evan exchanged glances. They'd been discussing expansion possibilities, but hadn't made final decisions. I think, Victoria said slowly, we grow carefully, add services as we can support them. Maybe hire some staff so Evan isn't working 2 jobs indefinitely. Maybe expand to neighboring communities. but always keeping our core mission, helping people rebuild their lives with dignity. And you're staying in Meridian? Maya pressed. Permanently? If that's okay with you and your dad. I know I've been imposing for 6 months now. You're not imposing, Evan interrupted. Your family. The word hung in the air, surprising all three of them, but it felt right. Victoria had become woven into their lives in ways that transcended her original role as rescued stranger or former enemy. She was part of their daily rhythm, their shared mission, their home. Family, Victoria repeated softly, testing the word. I haven't had that in a long time. You have it now, Maya said firmly. You're stuck with us. Deal with it. They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming bigger dreams. The Second Chance initiative would grow, would help more people, would become a model for other communities. Evan would slowly transition from the auto shop to full-time work at the center. Victoria would continue building the organization, but with checks and balances and transparency built into every system. And maybe, though this was harder to articulate, Evan would start exploring his own second chance. The articles about Thomas Jensen's conviction had opened doors he'd thought permanently closed. A few engineering firms had reached out tentatively after seeing his name in the news. Nothing concrete yet, but possibilities. Whispers of a future that might include the career he'd lost alongside the meaningful work he'd found. The path forward wasn't certain. Challenges remained. Funding would always be tight. The work would always be demanding. Old wounds might never fully heal. But they would face it together, three people bound by tragedy and transformed by grace into something resembling a family. As Evan lay in bed that night, he thought about the man he'd been 10 years ago. Ambitious, successful, convinced that achievement and status defined worth. That man had been destroyed by betrayal and injustice, but from the wreckage had emerged someone different, someone who understood that character mattered more than credentials, that compassion trumped revenge, that the measure of a life wasn't what you achieved, but who you became through both triumph and suffering. He wouldn't trade places with his younger self even if he could. The pain had been real and the losses significant, but so was the wisdom earned through survival. So was the depth of purpose found in helping others. So was the profound grace of learning to forgive. Not because the wrong was minor, but because carrying hatred hurt more than letting it go. Outside, the first stars of evening appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, Victoria and Maya were still talking softly in the living room, their voices a quiet murmur of planning and hope. Evan fell asleep listening to them, grateful for storms that brought unexpected guests, for choices to stop rather than drive past, for second chances that transformed everyone involved. The story wasn't over. But for the first time in 10 years, Evan could see a future worth running toward rather than a past worth running from. And that, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was everything. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as Evan stood outside the Second Chance initiative, watching the sunrise paint the brick building in shades of gold and amber. 8 months had passed since the city council's permanent approval, and the center had become something beyond what he and Victoria had initially imagined. What started as a desperate attempt to transform personal tragedy into community good had evolved into a thriving hub of hope and reconstruction. The door opened behind him, and Victoria emerged with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, a morning ritual they'd developed over the months of working side by side. "You're here early," she said, handing him a mug. "Couldn't sleep again?" "Too much on my mind. Good things mostly, but still overwhelming." Evan took a grateful sip of the coffee, exactly how he liked it. Victoria had learned his preferences through months of shared mornings. "The grant notification comes today. Either we get the federal funding for expansion, or we stay at current capacity for another year." "We'll get it," Victoria said with confidence that had grown steadily as the center's success became undeniable. "Our numbers are exceptional. 63 permanent placements in 8 months, over 100 clients served, partnerships with 40 local businesses. The grant committee would be crazy to pass us over." "You sound like the CEO you used to be." "I am a CEO, just a better one now." Victoria smiled, but there was truth beneath the lightness. She'd found her calling again, but this time building something that measured success in transformed lives rather than profit margins. "Speaking of which, I got an interesting call yesterday. The mayor's office wants to feature us in their economic development marketing. Apparently, we're now considered a model program. Evan shook his head in wonder. A year ago, I was changing oil at Morrison's shop, and you were sleeping in shelters. Now we're a model program featured by the mayor. Life is strange. Life is grace, Victoria corrected gently. Strange is just what grace looks like when you're not expecting it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the town wake up around them. The relationship between them had evolved into something neither could have predicted, not quite friendship in the casual sense, but something deeper. Partnership forged in fire, mutual respect earned through shared struggle, and an understanding that came from parallel journeys through destruction and rebuilding. The peace was interrupted by Evan's phone buzzing. He pulled it out, his heart rate accelerating when he saw the sender's name, Jessica Chen, Director of Engineering at Cascade Systems. It's the engineering firm, he said, his voice tight with tension. The one in Seattle that's been considering me for the senior project manager position. Victoria moved closer, reading over his shoulder as he opened the email. Her hand found his arm as they read together, and Evan felt her grip tighten with each paragraph. Dear Mr. Cole, we are pleased to offer you the position of Senior Project Manager for Advanced Manufacturing Systems at Cascade Systems. Your background in innovative manufacturing processes, combined with your recent experience in program development and community leadership, makes you an ideal candidate. We understand this would require relocation from Meridian to Seattle, and we're prepared to offer a comprehensive relocation package. The email continued with salary details that made Evan's breath catch. More than triple what he made at Morrison's shop, with benefits and stock options and all the trappings of the career he'd lost a decade ago. This wasn't just a job offer. This was restoration, vindication. The engineering career he'd mourned for 10 years, returned and elevated. Evan, this is incredible, Victoria breathed. This is everything you lost coming back to you. You have to take it. But Evan was staring at one word in the email, relocation. Seattle was 300 miles away. Taking this job meant leaving Meridian, leaving Maya's last year of high school in the town where she'd built friendships and found stability, leaving the Second Chance initiative during a critical growth phase, leaving Victoria to manage the expansion alone, leaving the life he'd rebuilt from nothing. I don't know if I can, he said quietly. Victoria pulled back to look at him directly, confusion and concern mixing on her face. What do you mean you don't know? This is your dream job. This is what we've been working toward, clearing your name, getting you back into engineering. You can't turn this down. It's not that simple. Maya's a senior. The center needs both of us to manage the expansion. In Seattle, he gestured vaguely. Everything I've built is here. So everything you were forced to build because you had no other options, Victoria countered, her voice gaining intensity. Evan, this is what you're supposed to do. Engineering is your calling, your passion. I've watched you light up when you talk about design problems and manufacturing processes. You're brilliant at what we do here, but it's not what you were meant for. How do you know what I'm meant for? Because I see how you look at technical journals when you think nobody's watching. I see how you volunteer to help with any problem that requires engineering thinking. I hear the longing in your voice when you talk about the Morrison project and what might have been. Victoria's eyes were bright with emotion. You gave me a second chance at my calling. Let me return the favor by refusing to let you settle for less than yours. The conversation was interrupted by Maya's voice from the doorway. Dad, why didn't you tell me about the job offer? Evan turned to find his daughter standing there in her school clothes, her backpack slung over one shoulder, phone in her hand displaying the same email he'd just read. Victoria must have forwarded it in some misguided attempt to help, or maybe Maya had access to his email. He'd given her his passwords for emergencies. Maya, I just got it this morning, and you were already thinking of turning it down, she interrupted, walking toward them with the purposeful stride she'd inherited from her mother. I can see it on your face. You're going to say no because of me. You're a senior. Your friends are here. Your school... Dad, I'm 17, not 7. I can handle changing schools for 1 year, and honestly, part of me wants to see somewhere new before college anyway. Maya set her backpack down and crossed her arms. You've spent my entire childhood sacrificing your dreams to give me stability. I'm not letting you do it again. Not when you finally have the chance to get back what was stolen from you. It's not that simple, sweetheart. There's the center, and Victoria needs help with the expansion, and And I can manage it, Victoria interjected firmly. Evan, if we get the grant, when we get the grant, we'll be hiring 3 new staff members. I don't need you here full-time anymore. I need you to go reclaim your life and stop using the center as an excuse to play it safe. The words hit hard because they carried truth. Somewhere in the past months, the center had become Evan's comfort zone, a place where he felt competent and needed without risking the kind of vulnerability that came with pursuing bigger dreams. He'd convinced himself he was being responsible, being mature, being realistic, but maybe he was just being scared. What if I fail? The question came out raw, exposing the fear he'd been carrying since the first engineering firm contacted him. What if I've been out too long and I can't keep up, and I prove Thomas Jensen right about not being tough enough for the industry? Then you'll have failed trying, Maya said simply, which is better than succeeding at something smaller than you're capable of. You taught me that, remember? When I wanted to quit robotics because I was afraid I wasn't smart enough. Evan did remember, Maya at 14, crying over circuit boards and threatening to drop out of the program. He told her that fear of failure was just fear of discovering your own limits, and the only way to know what you were truly capable of was to push against those limits until they broke, or you did. That was different, he protested weakly. No, it wasn't. You're just scared, and that's okay. But don't let fear make your decisions. Maya moved closer, taking his hand. Dad, you've spent 10 years being the person Thomas Jensen tried to destroy. Don't you want to spend the next 10 being the person he couldn't? The insight was devastating in its accuracy. Evan had survived, had rebuilt, had even found meaning in the smaller life circumstances had forced on him. But he'd never truly reclaimed who he was before the fall. He'd adapted rather than restored, accepted rather than fought back. This job offer was a chance to do more than survive. It was a chance to actually win. I need to think about it, he said finally. The offer stands for 2 weeks. Let me just think. Victoria and Maya exchanged looks but nodded. They understood that this decision needed to be his, made without pressure, even though they'd both made their positions clear. The rest of that day passed in a blur. The grant notification came through, approved, fully funded, with enough money to hire staff and expand services to 3 neighboring counties. It should have been a moment of pure celebration, but Evan found himself distracted, turning the job offer over in his mind like a Rubik's Cube he couldn't quite solve. That evening, Danny Morrison stopped by the center as Evan was locking up. His oldest friend took one look at his face and said, "You got offered the Seattle job." "How did you know?" "Because you look like a man standing at a crossroads trying to figure out which way leads home." Danny leaned against his truck. "Want to grab a beer and talk about it?" They ended up at the small bar on Main Street, sitting in a booth in the back where they could talk without being overheard. Danny ordered them both local IPAs and waited patiently while Evan organized his thoughts. "I don't know what to do," Evan finally admitted. "Part of me wants to jump at this opportunity. It's everything I lost coming back even better. But another part feels like I'd be abandoning people who need me. Victoria in the center, Maya in her last year of high school, even you in the shop." "Let me stop you right there," Danny said firmly. "First, the shop will be fine without you. You've been splitting your time for months anyway, and I've got applications from 3 mechanics who'd love your position. Second, Maya is practically an adult and she's explicitly telling you she wants you to take the job. Third, Victoria is one of the most competent people I've ever met. She'll manage the center brilliantly. So let's be honest about what this is really about. What do you think it's really about? You're terrified. You spent 10 years building a smaller, safer life where the stakes were low enough that losing didn't destroy you again. Now you're being asked to climb back up to the high wire, where falling actually means something, and that's scary as hell. Evan took a long drink of his beer, letting Danny's words settle. "When did you become so insightful?" "I've always been insightful. You've just been too busy surviving to notice." Danny smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Look, man, I watched what happened to you 10 years ago. I saw it break you in ways you still haven't fully admitted. You lost more than your career. You lost your confidence in your own judgment. Thomas Jensen didn't just steal your job. He stole your certainty that you deserved good things." The observation cut deep. Evan realized Danny was right. Somewhere in the years of struggle and rebuilding, He'd internalized the idea that he didn't deserve the life he'd once had, that wanting more than what he'd scraped together was greedy or unrealistic. So what do I do? You take the damn job. You pack up, you move to Seattle, you let Maya have a year of adventure before college, and you reclaim who you were always meant to be. Danny leaned forward. And you stop punishing yourself for something that was never your fault in the first place. They talked until the bar closed, working through logistics and fears and possibilities. By the time Evan drove home, something had shifted inside him. The decision still scared him, but the path forward was becoming clearer. He found Victoria still awake, working on grant reports at the kitchen table. She looked up when he entered, her expression cautious. "Have you decided?" she asked. "Not officially, but I'm leaning toward yes." Evan sat down across from her. "Which means we need to talk about transition plans for the center. If I'm leaving in 2 months, you'll need to be ready to manage everything alone." Relief and sadness mixed on Victoria's face. "I'm glad. Truly. You deserve this, Evan, but I'm going to miss working with you every day. You've become—" She paused, searching for words. "You've become my partner in the best sense. My friend. The person who believed I could be better when I didn't believe it myself. You're going to be fine without me. Better than fine, you're going to be brilliant. You've found your calling again, Victoria. Leading this organization, helping people rebuild their lives. This is who you were always meant to be. I learned it from you, from watching how you rebuilt your own life with grace and dignity. You showed me what real strength looks like." Victoria's eyes glistened with tears she was too proud to let fall. "I know this is the right decision. I know you need to do this, but I'm still going to miss you. Seattle's not that far. I can visit. And you'll be so busy with the expansion, you won't have time to miss me." Evan reached across the table and took her hand. "We're always going to be connected by what we built here. That doesn't end just because I'm taking a job in another city." They talked through the night about transition plans and hiring strategies and how to maintain organizational continuity during leadership changes. But beneath the practical discussion ran a current of emotion. The recognition that their daily partnership was ending, that the intense collaboration born from tragedy and sustained through determination was shifting into something different. The next morning, Evan composed his acceptance email to Cascade Systems, his finger hovering over the send button for a long moment before finally clicking it. The response came within hours: enthusiastic welcome, start date in 8 weeks, relocation coordinator assigned to help with the move. Maya was ecstatic when he told her officially, immediately planning how to make the most of her last months in Meridian while getting excited about Seattle. Victoria threw herself into hiring and training new staff with the focused intensity Evan recognized from their early days building the center. Everyone was moving forward, adapting to the change, finding the opportunities hidden in the ending. But Evan found himself struggling with unexpected emotions. Joy at reclaiming his career mixed with grief at leaving behind the life he'd built. Excitement about the future tangled with nostalgia for the present. He'd wanted this for so long, the restoration of his engineering career, vindication of his capabilities. But now that it was happening, he hadn't anticipated how much it would hurt to leave. 3 weeks before the move, the center held a community celebration honoring the grant funding and announcing Evan's departure. The building was packed with clients whose lives had been changed, volunteers who'd supported the mission, business partners who'd taken chances on displaced workers. Evan stood at the front beside Victoria, looking at the sea of faces, and felt overwhelmed by the impact they'd managed to create in less than a year. Bill Harmon stood up to speak, the first client they'd successfully placed. "A year ago, I thought my life was over, 53 years old, laid off, no prospects, watching my savings evaporate. I came to this center because I had nowhere else to go. And Evan Cole sat with me for 3 hours, helping me see that my experience had value, that displacement wasn't failure, that starting over was possible. Because of him and Victoria, I'm working again. I'm providing for my family again. I'm myself again. That's what this place does. It gives people back to themselves." Others spoke, sharing similar stories of transformation and second chances. Evan listened to them and realized that this year working beside Victoria hadn't been a detour from his real life. It had been his real life. The engineering career waiting in Seattle was important, was restoration of something stolen, was a victory worth claiming. But the work here had been meaningful in ways that transcended professional success. When it was his turn to speak, Evan struggled to find adequate words. "A year ago, I found someone on the side of the highway during a storm," he began, his voice carrying through the crowded room. "I had every reason to drive past, every justification for leaving them there. The person I found had once destroyed my career, had cost me my marriage, had forced me to rebuild my entire life from nothing. But I stopped anyway. Not because I was particularly noble or forgiving, but because it was the right thing to do. And that choice, that single moment of choosing grace over revenge, changed everything." He looked at Victoria, who stood beside him with tears streaming down her face. "Victoria Lane and I built this center from shared wreckage. We took our mutual destruction and transformed it into something that helps others. And in the process, we both discovered that redemption is real, that second chances can heal both the giver and the receiver, that forgiveness isn't about forgetting harm, but about refusing to let harm define your future." Evan turned back to the crowd. "I'm leaving to reclaim the career I lost, but I'm not leaving behind the lessons this year taught me. I'm not leaving behind the understanding that people matter more than positions, that character beats credentials, that the measure of a life is how you treat others when you have power over them. Seattle will get an engineer, but Meridian gave me back my humanity, and I'll carry that with me wherever I go." The applause was thunderous. People stood, cheering for the center and its mission and the transformed lives it represented. Evan caught Maya's eye across the room. His daughter was crying openly, pride and sadness mixing on her young face. After the celebration wound down, Evan found himself alone in the center's main room, looking at the walls covered with success stories and the desks where so many people had rebuilt their lives. Victoria joined him, carrying 2 glasses of wine from the reception. "To endings and beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To grace and second chances," Evan countered, clinking his glass against hers. They drank in silence, both contemplating the journey that had brought them from that stormy highway to this moment of transition. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said finally. "Something I've been afraid to say because I didn't want to complicate your decision about Seattle." "What is it?" "I'm in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe when we were building this place together, or maybe when you stood beside me facing Thomas Jensen, or maybe it was always there underneath the complicated history. But I am. I'm in love with you, and I need you to know that before you leave." Evan felt his heart stutter in his chest. He'd felt the connection between them deepening over the months, had noticed the way Victoria looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, had caught himself thinking about her in ways that went beyond professional partnership. But he'd pushed those feelings aside, telling himself they were just products of intense shared experience, that mixing romance with their complicated history would be foolish. "Victoria, you don't have to say anything," she interrupted quickly. "I'm not telling you this to change your plans or make you feel obligated. You should still take the Seattle job. You need to reclaim your career. I just needed you to know the truth before you left, that you're not just my business partner or my friend or the person who saved my life. You're the person I fell in love with while we were building something beautiful from our shared destruction." Evan set down his wine glass carefully, his mind racing. He thought about the past months, working beside Victoria daily, watching her transform from broken refugee to confident leader, sharing victories and setbacks, and 3 a.m. coffee while solving problems. He thought about the way she made him laugh, challenged his thinking, believed in his worth even when he doubted it. He thought about how right it felt to work with her, to stand beside her, to face the world as partners. "I think I love you too," he admitted, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "I've been trying not to, because it felt complicated and messy and potentially destructive to everything we built. But I do. I love who you've become, who you helped me become, who we are together." Victoria's face transformed, hope and joy breaking through the vulnerability. "Then stay. Or let me come with you to Seattle. Or we'll figure out long distance. I don't care how we make it work, just don't walk away from this. From us. Victoria, my life is about to change completely. New city, new job, massive pressure to prove I can still compete at that level. I don't know if I can handle a new relationship on top of all that transition." So we take it slow. We figure it out as we go. Evan, we built a nonprofit from nothing in less than a year. We transformed personal tragedy into community benefit. We turned hatred into partnership and pain into purpose. If we can do all that, we can figure out how to be together. Evan pulled her close, and Victoria came willingly into his arms. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the center they'd built together, both knowing that everything was about to change again, but feeling less afraid of the change because they'd face it together. "Okay," Evan whispered into her hair. "Okay, we'll figure it out. But I need to do Seattle on my own first. Get settled in the job, make sure I can actually handle it, prove to myself that I belong there. Then we'll talk about what comes next for us." "How long?" "Give me 6 months. 6 months to get established, to know if this career restoration is real or just a fantasy. Then if you still want to, we'll figure out how to be together for real." Victoria pulled back to look at him. 6 months. I can do 6 months. I've waited this long to have a real home and a real purpose. I can wait a little longer to have you too. They kissed then, tentatively, at first, testing this new dimension of their relationship, then with growing certainty. It felt right in ways that surprised Evan, natural and inevitable, like this was where their story had been leading all along. The final weeks in Meridian passed too quickly. Evan trained Victoria's new staff, transitioned his shop responsibilities to Danny's new hire, and helped Maya prepare for the move. They sold furniture they didn't need, packed up years of accumulated life, and said goodbye to neighbors and friends. The day before the move, Evan drove out to the old neighborhood one last time. He parked in front of the house he'd lost in foreclosure, the blue one with the maple tree, and sat staring at it. This house represented his before, the life he'd planned, the success he'd achieved, the future that had been stolen. But as he sat there, Evan realized he didn't want that life back. Not really. That version of himself had been successful but shallow, focused on achievement rather than character, measuring worth by credentials rather than integrity. The man he'd become through loss and rebuilding was better, more compassionate, more resilient, more fundamentally decent. Thomas Jensen had tried to destroy him. Instead, he'd inadvertently created someone stronger. Evan drove away from his old house for the last time, feeling not grief, but liberation. The past was finished. The future was beginning. Seattle welcomed them with characteristic rain, soft and persistent, turning everything gray and green. Maya adapted quickly, finding friends at her new school and exploring the city with teenage enthusiasm. Evan threw himself into work at Cascade Systems, driven by equal parts excitement and terror. The first few months were brutal. His skills were rusty, his knowledge outdated in key areas, his confidence fragile. He worked late nights learning new software and studying updated manufacturing processes, feeling constantly behind despite his team's supportiveness. There were moments when he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, if he'd overestimated his ability to return to this level of work. But gradually, the old competence returned. Muscle memory kicked in. His unique perspective, combining traditional engineering with the problem-solving approaches he'd developed during his years of survival, made him valuable in unexpected ways. He brought creativity to technical challenges and emotional intelligence to team dynamics. The combination was powerful. By the 3-month mark, Evan was leading a major project, redesigning a manufacturing process for a client in aerospace. By 5 months, his project had exceeded expectations, and the client was requesting him specifically for future work. By 6 months, he'd proven to himself and others that he belonged exactly where he was. Victoria came to visit the week he hit the 6-month mark. Evan picked her up from the airport, and his heart lurched when he saw her waiting in baggage claim. She looked radiant, confident, and healthy and beautiful in ways that transcended physical appearance. This was a woman who'd found herself and her purpose, who'd survived destruction and emerged stronger. They spent the weekend exploring Seattle together, talking and laughing and carefully navigating around the big conversation they needed to have. On Sunday evening, they sat in a coffee shop overlooking Elliott Bay, watching ferries cross the darkening water, finally addressing what they'd both been dancing around. 6 months are up, Victoria said quietly. You've proven you can do this. The question is, what do we do now? Evan took her hand across the table. I've been thinking about that. A lot. And here's what I know. I love you. I want to build a life with you, but I also know that your work in Meridian is important, and you shouldn't abandon it just because I took a job in Seattle. So long distance? Visits when we can manage them? For now, maybe. But also, Evan pulled out his phone and showed her something he'd been researching. Cascade Systems has a branch office in Boise. It's smaller than the Seattle headquarters, but they're expanding their manufacturing division and need senior leadership. I asked about the possibility of transferring there once I've established myself here. Victoria's eyes widened. Boise is 45 minutes from Meridian. Exactly. Close enough that I could work in Boise and we could live together in Meridian. Close enough that I could stay involved with the center while pursuing my engineering career. Close enough that we could actually build a life together instead of just visiting it in stolen weekends. When could you transfer? They're thinking a year, maybe 18 months. Long enough to prove my value here, to make the transfer look like advancement rather than failure. Evan squeezed her hand. I know that's a long time to wait, but I'm willing to do it if you are. Because this, us, matters more than any career. I spent 10 years believing work defined worth. Now I know better. Worth is measured in relationships and character and who you choose to stand beside when life gets hard. Victoria was crying now, not bothering to hide it. I'll wait. Of course I'll wait. The center is expanding into 3 more counties. We're hiring additional staff. I'll be too busy to feel lonely most days. And when I'm lonely, I'll remember that you're building a future where we can actually be together. Then that's the plan. 1 year of long distance while I establish myself. Then Boise transfer, and we figure out life together in Meridian. Deal? Deal. Victoria leaned across the table and kissed him, tender and full of promise. Thank you for not making me choose between you and the center, for understanding that my work there matters. Of course it matters. It's redemption made real, grace transformed into action. I would never ask you to abandon that. They spent the rest of Victoria's visit planning their future, talking about the house they'd buy together, the ways they'd integrate their lives, the possibility of expanding the Second Chance Initiative's model to other cities. It wasn't the life either of them had planned years ago, but it was better, richer in meaning, deeper in purpose, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values, rather than just attraction or convenience. When Evan dropped Victoria at the airport Sunday night, their goodbye was bittersweet but not desperate. They had a plan. They had a future. They had each other, even across the miles. The year that followed was challenging but manageable. Evan and Victoria talked daily, visited monthly, and built their relationship through patience and intention rather than proximity. Evan continued to excel at Cascade Systems, earning respect and promotions. Victoria expanded the Second Chance Initiative into a regional model, with satellite offices serving 5 counties and partnerships with dozens of employers. Maya graduated high school at the top of her class and chose to attend university in Boise, close enough to both her father's future location and the center that had become like a second home. She'd been transformed by the past 2 years as well, developing a passion for social work and nonprofit management that traced directly back to watching her father and Victoria build something meaningful from wreckage. 18 months after moving to Seattle, Evan transferred to the Boise office as Director of Advanced Manufacturing. The title came with significant responsibility but also flexibility to live in Meridian and maintain involvement with the center. He and Victoria bought a house together, not large or fancy, but filled with light and possibility. The house sat on the same street where Evan had first found Victoria on that stormy night 2 years ago. Some days he drove past the exact spot, marveling at the strange grace that had brought them together. A moment of choosing compassion over revenge had transformed both their lives completely. On a golden October afternoon, 2 years to the day after finding Victoria on the highway, they stood together in the Second Chance Initiative's expanded facility, preparing for a major celebration. The center had just been recognized as a national model for workforce development, with inquiries from cities across the country wanting to replicate their approach. Media outlets were covering the story. Victoria had been interviewed by national news programs. The small nonprofit born from tragedy had become a beacon of hope for displaced workers everywhere. But before the celebration began, before the speeches and recognition and cameras, Evan pulled Victoria aside into the quiet of her office. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Victoria's eyes went wide. Evan, I know we've only officially been together for 18 months. I know this is fast by conventional standards. But Victoria, we've been building a life together for 2 years. We've faced more challenges and overcome more obstacles than most couples encounter in a lifetime. I know who you are, not just when things are good, but when everything is falling apart. And I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring, sapphire, surrounded by small diamonds, elegant without being ostentatious. Victoria Lane, will you marry me? Victoria was crying and laughing simultaneously, her hands shaking as she nodded emphatically. Yes, yes, of course, yes. I can't imagine my life without you in it. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, physically, emotionally, spiritually. You showed me that redemption is real and second chances exist and grace can transform anything. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes. Evan slipped the ring onto her finger, and they held each other in the office where they'd planned their organization and built their future. Through the window, they could see the celebration preparations continuing, clients and volunteers and community members gathering to honor what had been built here. I never told you, Victoria said softly, what I was thinking that night on the highway, right before I fell. You don't have to. I want to. I was thinking that I'd destroyed everything I touched, that my father would be ashamed of me, that the world would be better off without someone who'd failed so catastrophically. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I was ready to give up completely. And then you stopped. You chose to help someone who didn't deserve it, who'd hurt you terribly, who had no claim on your compassion. And that choice, your choice, gave me a reason to keep fighting. You gave yourself that reason. I just provided the opportunity. Maybe. But the opportunity mattered. The grace mattered. The radical kindness of stopping for your enemy mattered more than you'll ever know. Victoria touched his face gently. I was broken, Evan. Completely shattered. And somehow, through helping me piece myself back together, you healed your own wounds too. We saved each other. The office door burst open and Maya rushed in, slightly out of breath. The ceremony starts in 5 minutes and you two need to... She stopped, seeing the ring on Victoria's hand and the expressions on their faces. Oh my God! Oh my God, you proposed! Dad! She launched herself at both of them, wrapping them in a fierce hug. The three of them stood there together, a family formed not by blood or convention, but by choice and circumstance and the transformative power of grace. The celebration that afternoon was joyous and meaningful. Client after client stood to share stories of transformation. Bill Harmon, now managing his own construction company and employing other displaced workers. Jennifer Martinez, who'd lost her teaching career in a school closure and now ran educational programs at the center. David Chen, whose tech industry layoff at 55 had devastated him, but who now consulted for startups and mentored young entrepreneurs. Each story was different in details, but similar in essence. People who'd fallen through society's cracks and found hands reaching down to pull them back up. People who'd lost everything and discovered they still had worth. People who'd been given second chances and used them to become better versions of themselves. When it was Evan's turn to speak, he looked out at the crowd and saw the full impact of what he and Victoria had built. Hundreds of lives changed, families restored, dignity returned, hope rekindled. All of it traced back to a choice made on a stormy highway to stop for someone who needed help. 2 years ago, he began, I had every reason to leave Victoria Lane on the side of that road. She'd destroyed my career, cost me my marriage, forced me to rebuild my life from nothing. By any measure of justice, I owed her nothing. By any standard of revenge, leaving her there would have been fair payback. The room was silent, everyone listening intently. But I stopped anyway, not because I was particularly good or noble, but because it was the right thing to do. And that choice, that single moment of choosing grace over revenge, started a chain reaction that changed everything. Victoria and I built this center from our shared wreckage. We transformed our mutual destruction into something that helps others. And in the process, we both learned that redemption isn't just possible, it's powerful. He looked at Victoria, standing beside him wearing his ring, her eyes bright with tears and joy. Thomas Jensen tried to destroy both of us. He succeeded in taking away our careers, our reputations, our sense of security, but he couldn't take away our fundamental character. He couldn't take away our ability to choose compassion over bitterness, to build rather than destroy, to extend to others the grace we needed ourselves. Evan turned back to the crowd. That's what this center represents, not just job training or career counseling, but the radical idea that every person deserves a second chance. That displacement isn't destiny, that falling doesn't mean failing unless you refuse to get back up, and that the measure of a community isn't how it treats people at their best, but how it responds when they're at their worst. The applause was overwhelming. People stood, cheering not just for the center, but for the idea it represented, that broken things can be mended, that second chances can heal, that grace has the power to transform everything it touches. After the celebration wound down, after the guests departed and the building grew quiet, Evan and Victoria stood together in the main room, surrounded by evidence of transformed lives. Maya had gone home to start planning the wedding with characteristic enthusiasm. They were alone with the silence and the satisfaction of work well done. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if none of it had happened?" Victoria asked. "If Thomas had never framed you, if I'd never fired you, if everything had gone according to your original plan?" Evan considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But then I remember that version of me was focused on all the wrong things. Achievement over character, success over significance. I was brilliant at engineering, but undeveloped as a human being. And now? Now I'm still a good engineer, but I'm also a better father, a better partner, a better person. The version of me that existed before the fall was accomplished but shallow. This version, the one built from wreckage and hardship, has depth." He pulled Victoria close. "So no, I don't wish it hadn't happened. I wish it had happened differently, with less pain and fewer casualties. But I wouldn't trade who we've become for who we were." Victoria rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I used to think success meant building the biggest company, making the most money, having the most prestigious reputation. Now I know that success is measured in transformed lives, and second chances given, and the courage to choose grace when revenge would be easier." They stood there in the quiet, two people who'd been broken by the same man and healed through choosing each other. Outside, meridian settled into evening, lights coming on in houses, families gathering for dinner, the ordinary miracle of community continuing around them. Evan thought about the journey that had brought them here, the lost decade working as a mechanic when he should have been innovating manufacturing processes, the 18 months Victoria spent homeless and hopeless, the prison visit confronting Thomas Jensen, the decision to build something good from shared tragedy, the risk of choosing love when self-protection would have been safer. Every moment had been necessary. Every hardship had taught lessons that couldn't be learned any other way. Every choice to extend grace rather than seek revenge had built the foundation of something remarkable. "Do you think Thomas knows?" Victoria asked quietly. "About all of this? About how his attempt to destroy us ended up creating something beautiful?" "I hope not," Evan answered honestly. "I hope he sits in his cell convinced he won, that he successfully destroyed both our lives. Because the alternative, him knowing that we turned his cruelty into compassion, his destruction into creation, that would feel like giving him credit he doesn't deserve." "Fair point." Victoria smiled against his chest. "We did this despite him, not because of him. Our choices made the difference. Our refusal to let hatred poison our futures, our decision to build rather than destroy." "Exactly." They locked up the center together and walked to their car hand in hand. The autumn evening was cool and clear, stars visible despite the ambient light from town. Evan looked up at them, distant and constant and indifferent to human drama, and felt grateful for the strange path his life had taken. The wedding happened the following spring in the center's main room, surrounded by clients and volunteers and community members who'd become family. Maya served as maid of honor, wearing a dress the same sapphire color as Victoria's engagement ring. Danny Morrison stood beside Evan as best man, having watched the entire journey from devastating loss to triumphant restoration. Mrs. Patterson officiated, her presence a symbol of community blessing. Bill Harmon and other clients formed an honor guard as Evan and Victoria walked down an aisle lined with photos documenting the center's growth and impact. Every detail celebrated not just their union, but the community they'd built together. When it came time for vows, Evan spoke words he'd written late at night, trying to capture the complexity of what they'd built together. Victoria, you came into my life as an enemy and became my greatest partner. You destroyed me once and then helped me rebuild better than I was before. You showed me that grace is stronger than revenge, that forgiveness heals more than punishment, that love can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. I vow to stand beside you in building lives and second chances. I vow to choose compassion over bitterness, creation over destruction, us over easy. I vow to love you not despite our complicated history, but because of everything that history taught us about redemption. Victoria's vows were equally powerful, her voice strong despite tears streaming down her face. Evan, you saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. You extended grace I didn't deserve and showed me that second chances are real. You taught me that who you've been doesn't have to define who you become, that falling isn't failing unless you refuse to get back up. I vow to honor the gift you gave me by giving that same grace to others. I vow to build rather than destroy, to lead with integrity, to measure success in transformed lives rather than personal achievement. I vow to love you fiercely and faithfully for all our days, and to never forget that our love was born from choosing compassion in the hardest circumstances. They sealed their vows with a kiss that felt like both ending and beginning, the completion of their journey from enemies to partners, and the commencement of their life together as a married couple dedicated to transforming lives through grace. The reception was joyous and loud and full of love. Clients toasted the couple who'd given them second chances. Business partners celebrated the organization that was changing workforce development across the region. Friends and family honored two people who turned tragedy into triumph through sheer determination and radical kindness. Late in the evening, Evan found himself on the center's front steps with Maya, watching the celebration continue inside. "You did good, Dad," Maya said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You took something terrible and made it beautiful." That's pretty much the definition of grace. We all did it together. You, me, Victoria, everyone who believed the center mattered. Maybe, but it started with you stopping on that highway. That was the choice that made everything else possible. Maya looked up at him. "I'm proud of you. Not just for the engineering career or the nonprofit or getting married. I'm proud of you for being the kind of person who stops for enemies on dark highways. That's the real victory, staying decent when circumstances gave you every excuse to be cruel." Evan hugged his daughter close, this incredible young woman who'd weathered so much upheaval with grace and maturity beyond her years. "I love you, sweetheart. Thank you for believing in all of this, for supporting Victoria, for understanding why we had to try." "Of course I supported it. You were miserable before, Dad. You tried to hide it, but I could tell. You were surviving rather than living, going through motions rather than pursuing dreams. Now you're actually alive again. How could I not support that?" They watched Victoria through the window, laughing with clients and dancing with Bill Harmon, radiant with joy and purpose. 2 years ago, she'd been broken and homeless. Now she was a respected community leader, a national model for nonprofit management, a woman who'd transformed personal catastrophe into collective benefit. "Do you think people can really change?" Maya asked. "Like fundamentally change who they are?" "I think circumstances can reveal who people always were underneath their circumstances," Evan answered carefully. Victoria wasn't fundamentally different as a CEO versus who she is now, but homelessness stripped away the protective layers and forced her to develop the parts of herself she'd been neglecting: compassion, humility, genuine care for others beyond how they could benefit her. "And you? Did you change?" "I think I deepened. The core of who I was remained constant. I was always someone who valued integrity and family and doing right by people. But losing everything forced me to develop resilience and perspective and the ability to find meaning in smaller things. I'm not different. I'm just more fully myself." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense, and maybe that's what redemption really means. Not becoming someone different, but becoming the best version of who you always were." "When did you get so wise?" Evan asked, echoing words he'd spoken many times before. "I had good teachers." Maya smiled and stood up. "Come on, you're the groom. You should be dancing with your bride, not hiding out here with your daughter." They went back inside together. Evan found Victoria and pulled her into his arms for a slow dance as the DJ played something soft and romantic. She fit perfectly against him, their bodies moving in comfortable synchronization after 2 years of learning each other's rhythms. "Happy?" he murmured into her hair. Deliriously, terrifyingly, completely. Victoria pulled back to look at him. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the universe to realize it made a mistake giving me all this happiness." "The universe doesn't make mistakes. You've earned this, Victoria. Through hard work and genuine transformation, and refusing to give up even when giving up would have been easier. We've earned it, both of us, together." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for choosing grace when revenge would have been justified. Thank you for showing me that second chances aren't just real. They're powerful enough to transform everything." They danced until the DJ packed up, until the last guest departed, until only family remained to help clean up. Then they drove to their house, their home, and sat on the porch watching the stars. This couple who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful through choosing grace over and over again. Years later, when people asked how they met, Evan and Victoria would share the story honestly. The firing, the blacklist, the embezzlement, the prison visit, the nonprofit built from wreckage. They never sugar-coated the pain or pretended the journey had been easy, but they always emphasized the same truth, that grace is more powerful than revenge, that second chances can heal everyone involved, that choosing compassion over bitterness transforms not just the recipient, but the giver. The Second Chance Initiative grew into a national organization with branches in 40 cities. Maya eventually took over as executive director, having completed her master's in social work and developed innovations that pushed the model even further. Evan continued engineering work he loved while maintaining involvement with the organization. Victoria became a sought-after speaker on workforce development and organizational transformation. But their greatest achievement wasn't the expanded reach or the thousands of lives changed or the recognition and awards. It was the simple fact of having built a life together, a marriage, a family, a purpose, from circumstances that should have destroyed them both. They'd taken tragedy and transformed it through radical kindness into something that would outlast them both. On quiet evenings, sitting on their porch watching the sunset, Evan sometimes thought about that stormy night when he'd found a broken woman on the highway. He thought about the choice to stop, the decision to help, the risk of extending grace to someone who'd hurt him deeply. That single moment had changed everything, had set in motion a series of events that transformed 2 lives, built an organization, and proved that second chances weren't just possible, but powerful. Victoria would take his hand on those evenings, understanding without words what he was thinking about. They'd sit together in comfortable silence, these 2 people who'd been enemies and became partners, who'd been broken and became healers, who'd lost everything and rebuilt something better. The autumn wind would carry the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the same scent that had filled the air that night 2 years ago when everything changed. But now the scent meant home and safety and love rather than storm and crisis. Now it meant the life they'd built together, the purpose they'd found, the grace that had transformed them both. And if someone had asked Evan in that moment whether he regretted the decade he'd lost, the career that had been stolen, the pain he'd endured, he would have answered honestly. He regretted the pain but treasured the wisdom it brought. He mourned the lost years but celebrated who those years had shaped him into becoming. He wished circumstances had been different, but wouldn't trade the life that emerged from those circumstances for anything. Because this life, built on grace and second chances and the radical choice to help rather than harm, was richer than anything he'd lost. This marriage, forged in fire and tested by adversity, was stronger than convenience or convention could ever create. This purpose, born from mutual destruction and sustained by shared determination, mattered more than any individual achievement. Evan Cole had been destroyed and rebuilt. Victoria Lane had fallen and risen. Together, they'd proven that redemption was real, that grace could transform anything, that second chances had the power to heal not just individuals but entire communities. And it all started with a simple choice to stop on a dark highway during a storm, to extend compassion to someone who'd once been an enemy, to choose grace when revenge would have been easier. That choice changed everything. That choice saved 2 lives. That choice proved that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from transforming them into partners, not from seeking justice, but from extending mercy, not from protecting yourself, but from risking connection despite every reason to stay closed. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Evan squeezed Victoria's hand and she squeezed back. No words were needed. They both understood the miracle they'd lived, that grace had the power to transform anything, that second chances could heal everyone involved, that love could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances if you were brave enough to choose it. The story that began on a storm-swept highway had found its resolution not in revenge or justice, but in grace. And that, they both knew, was the most powerful ending of all.